Bonjour, bienvenue pour cette troisième édition du LabEurope 2020 qui est organisée cette année dans le cadre de la Europa Games.
Third edition of LabEurope 2020 as part of the Europa Games Week, as part of the activities of the Strasbourg Games Week. For this third edition,
You can find the English version from this event on the link, the Vimeo link below. Je repasse au français. Pour cette troisième édition, donc,
so as we were saying, for this third edition organized by the Strasbourg office and the Eurometropole of Strasbourg of Europe Creative, is basically to highlight creative industries from an economic perspective and, of course, from a European perspective. Now, within Europe Creative, well, innovation and creativity are crucial elements. It's crucial to have some sort of a perspective that allows us to come together, to cooperate, to collaborate. In order to do so, to lead the discussion this afternoon, we have called upon two moderators, Domenico Laporta, a consultant for gaming, and also a narrative designer, and we also have with us Fanny Renard, who also represents the association Women in Games. So, without further ado, we leave you with Domenico to start us off this afternoon. And we would also like to thank both our interpreters who will be interpreting from French into English and vice versa, as well as our excellent technicians. So, Domenico. Thank you, Aurélie. Good day to you all. My name is Domenico Laporta, and I am delighted to be here with you to moderate with you with Fanny. Now, as Aurélie was just saying, linguistic diversity is very important, and I will thus be speaking in English because our first speaker is Martin Dawson,
Deputy Head of Unit Audiovisual Industry and Media Support Program at DG Connect European Commission. And we know that Strasbourg has a strong European dimension, and it was very important for us today to understand what is also organized at the level of the European Commission, especially because things are changing, things are evolving, positively evolving. First of all, we want to congratulate you and Creative Europe for the new budget that has increased, which is very good news. But as you will probably explain it, Creative Europe is only one of the perspectives of support when it comes to the European Commission. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what is in store for European indie game producers, and why do you believe at your level that is important to support them? You're on mute, Martin.
Thank you very much, Domenico. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So since we are doing a Zoom conference, another Zoom conference, because of COVID, I will start from that the audiovisual sector has been particularly impacted by the COVID crisis, and the economy of Europe as a whole, of course. And the European Union has responded with an unprecedented recovery package agreed in July with the member states, the famous recovery facility. And the Commission encourages the member states, invites the member states to allocate 20% of their recovery plans to digital, and audiovisual is recognized as being part of that 20% target. So this is something very new. It's something people will need to know. So 20% target for digital, including audiovisual and video games, of course, are part of audiovisual. We all know that video games, in fact, have consumption has increased during the confinement for obvious reasons. People are at home, need to be entertained, need to keep busy. But you should try and make sure that support to your industry is included in the recovery plans of your member state. That's the first thing. As you said, Domenico, in January next year, the new financial framework begins for the European Union budget. New framework, new programs, new Creative Europe. So Creative Europe, as the name implies, dedicated to the creative sectors, to audiovisual. Video games has always been a part of that. And building on the success of our support, we plan to extend that starting in January, and to complement it with a new element, which is immersive content. So we have seen that video games is one of the best vehicles to develop also this emerging market of virtual reality. And so we will be supporting a combination of these two very dynamic sectors, cutting edge sectors, video games and immersive content, with a focus on independent producers, because we know there are the global platforms, there are the giants from the US, from Japan. We here in Europe, we have the creativity, but we don't always have the scale. So we want to support independent producers. We want to support co-development, so people coming together across borders to do projects together, to reach international audiences. And we will always support producers who maintain their intellectual property, because we think this is a key indicator of the independence of producers. We will also be supporting training actions, because one thing that stakeholders have told us is that there is a lack of skilled labor to do all this intensive work on video games. So we will be focusing part of our support to training also on that. So recovery facility, Creative Europe. A third element is InvestEU. InvestEU is the name for the new European Union financial instrument to help entrepreneurs gain access to finance, whether that's loans or also equity. Starting in January, we will also be supporting access to equity. So up to you to decide whether you need loans, whether you need equity investment, depending on your financial needs, depending on your business strategy. But again, we want to support scaling up to be able to enable you to target the European market as if it was your domestic market. And I think video games is very good at that. In some other parts of the audiovisual sector, like cinema, for example, films tend to stay at home in the domestic market, but video games naturally travel better. But sure, we're called Creative Europe for a reason, and we want you to target the European market as a whole. And again, we've had a lot of success in the past through the famous guarantee facility. We supported loans to over 250 video games. So it's something that it has worked very well so far. The next on the list is Horizon Europe. This is more a research program, so it's more future-oriented, cutting edge. Again, video games has shown itself to be a great vehicle for developing artificial intelligence, because of the way that the artificial intelligence needs data to work, to grow. And where there are combinations of this type of combination between video game development, AI development, then there can be opportunities under Horizon, which is one of the flagship projects, something like 90 billion euro overall for Horizon Europe, starting in January. So that's a lot of information. In December, in a few weeks, we plan to adopt something called the Media Action Plan, which will give a picture of everything I've just said. putting everything together, showing how all the different opportunities and how they are linked up to help you navigate through all these opportunities. So last thing, I've spoken a lot about our support. I would like to say a few words about diversity because I know that's on your agenda today. The Creative Europe Media Programme has, over the last several years, had a special focus on diversity and gender balance in particular. We've collected a lot of data to see how we can, where we are and how we can improve, where we should focus our efforts. For example, we've introduced mentoring of women entrepreneurs in particular, and we will build on these efforts in the coming program starting in January as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Martin. Yes, a lot of things coming up. So building up, as you said, on what was successful before. And I hope that with all this increase of action, there will be also a lot of success and probably a lot of demands on European labs. Thank you. So, je passe en français de nouveau. Tout au long de cet après-midi.
So, this afternoon, we will have the possibility to hear from European stakeholders who will talk about what their industry looks like in their own respective countries and how they can perhaps be more present outside their national borders. We will also hear from two speakers from Montreal. So Nadine Jelly, I know it's very early back home. Well, yes, but the early bird catches the worm. So we're having our coffee, so we're fine. We're delighted to be here with you today. And yes, so our association represents 245 studios based in Quebec. So of course, we represent all sorts of companies like Ubisoft, which is of course very well known, but also studios that have 2 employees, for example. Now, all in all, we're talking about 13,500 employees. We are recognized as one of the major world clusters in the industry, working, of course, the cornerstone of our work is collaboration with other industries, but of course within our own industry. Furthermore, we really have created a solid network, and often we see that there's a lot of help coming from larger studios to the smaller operations, which is really sort of the characteristic of the industry here. But it's not only limited to that. It's very representative of Quebec spirit, really. Just to give you an example, during the COVID pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, all of the international missions came to a screeching halt, really. Even the GDC, I mean, which is a major expo show. So in terms of financing, it was it's a great opportunity, but we saw that Ubisoft and Google Stadia, we saw that they really answered the call, and they supported smaller studios, namely how to remain active during the pandemic. We launched a major campaign in order to do so, and we offered the opportunity to 20 studios free of cost to participate virtually in many conferences and congresses. So this was great for all of these startups. So this sort of framework, that we see that there is a lot of cooperation. It's I think what's really important here is that we see that it's not just a cutthroat competition sort of dynamic, but a lot of cooperation. We see that when one studio garners some success, the recipe, so to speak, the formula is basically circulated and disseminated. So we saw so much work, so much cooperation in terms of creativity. In this sense, we have been working with several associations in different sectors, the events, audiovisual, the audiovisual sector, and I mean, we have been very lucky to be able to be there for our sector, for the people and the companies that we represent. Of course, some sectors have been more affected than others, as Mr. Laporta had said, that video games in and of themselves have been affected a bit less than other sectors. So the idea was basically trying to figure out how, through the strong presence of video games, despite the pandemic, well, perhaps we could export some of these ideas to other more or less related fields and sectors, and of course the companies that make them up. So we always look to encourage within our organization to see, like, to have the big studios, big players collaborate and assist smaller ones to be successful, really. So we see so many independent studios that are excellent, really, all the world over. And I think that it's a great way to also gain a foothold throughout the entire world as well. Thank you, Nadine. I think that, of course, it's a worldwide sector nowadays, but we're also present on a national level. I think that little by little we're seeing that video games are gaining more recognition as a sector, also as a part of the cultural sector as well. And of course, we know that Canada is very active on the international scene, and there's a lot of cooperation going on with La Piscine, for example. I think you collaborate directly with Strasbourg, so it's a transatlantic collaboration project. Could you talk to us about that? Well, of course, I would be delighted to. I would like to just touch upon what Nadine was saying. In Montreal, in Quebec, we do collaborate quite a bit. If the territory of Quebec is larger than France itself, but the population is just around 10 million people. So yes, La Piscine has been working with the ICC, working with the different businesses in creative sectors. So we were able to create a support group for entrepreneurs, and we were that thus allowed us to assist them during the first wave of the pandemic, and also during the current second wave. We began an exchange program called Plouf with Paris. It was 2018. In 2019, we branched out to Strasbourg and to other regions through this partnership with Strasbourg. For example, we have been in contact with businesses in Strasbourg, and in this year, 2020, we decided to branch out to the rest of the world with 3 new territories in the United States. So it's of course a primary foreign market for people in Quebec, but of course, culturally and linguistically, French-speaking Europe is a logical step, and we want to also look to gain a foothold in the rest of Europe, Northern Europe, but also in Asia. Now, within French-speaking Europe, of course, we're talking about France, Belgium, and Switzerland, and we see that we do have a lot of potential for growth there as well. Now, within this program, we work mainly with bringing games to market. I think that, as we were saying, I think that we have a lot of very talented creative people, but sometimes, we have to give them a leg up when it comes to selling themselves, selling the product, gaining a presence in the market itself. So there's a lot of training and coaching going on in terms of, sales management, marketing, but also from an administrative perspective, from a management perspective. So that's basically what we've been up to. As we were saying, this year, we are actively looking to branch out in Europe. And I would be delighted to talk about, to exchange with representatives of different countries that are participating here, whether we're talking about Germany or Belgium or any other European country. These are territories that we would be delighted to work with, and the way we usually work is we send some of the people that work with us, and we also host our overseas partners. So thank you very much for your introduction. I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and I think a lot can be gained from working with all of these territories, especially with video games. I think we're really ultimately talking about a world market. According to our latest figures, we see that video games are doing quite well everywhere in the world. So it's nice to see that there are these initiatives to accompany perhaps smaller companies that want to take part in this world market. Now, we will now move on to our 3 round tables this afternoon. I will see you for the last 2. I will be moderating, but for now, I will leave you with Fanny Renard.
Fanny, c'est à toi.
Who will speak about gender equality in the sector. Thank you, Domenico. So we're talking about gender equality in this first round table.
Qualité de professionnel.
I am with you with experts and professionals from this sector. We have Anne Becker, who is
vidéo en Europe,
responsible for the ASFE, based in Belgium.
Directrice du studio danois Triple Topping Games, les créateurs du jeu.
Astrid Strup, from the company that brought us Welcome to Elk, which came out in January of this year.
Pierre-Étienne Marx,
member of the
du jeu vidéo
STGV, video game workers in France, and who is part of the Games Workers Unit, an international union that wants to change the way in which we work, and a representative from Booster Space, based in Germany, and
Cette présentation
working for more inclusivity in video games. So I would like to ask you to concentrate on what is equality, equal opportunity. What is equal opportunity? I am a manager in Gobin Studio. We are currently producing 8 video games. I also have a YouTube channel. Now, what we want to do is increase diversity in video games. And I would like to start with my first question. Anne, so Anne Becker, what's the situation on a European level? Could you give us some statistics, some polls, or what's the current situation in terms of diversity in Europe today?
For having me on this panel, and I'm really delighted to speak about this topic. So in terms of what's happening at European level, perhaps I can first outline what the European institutions are doing, because this is increasingly an important issue also at European level, and then to share a couple of data points that we have. So actually this year, and also about 2 weeks ago, the European Commission, they have published a gender equality strategy, and just last week they published an LGBTI strategy, which outlines a number of initiatives in order to favor a diverse, equal, inclusive society, whether that is through workplace, whether that is in order to make sure that we have the right competences, women engaging in STEM courses, etc. There are also some flagrant data points here, and I'm just going to read on the more broader statistics that we have seen. So today, women represent 17% of people in ICT studies and career in the EU, and they represent 34% of STEM graduates, and only 22% of AI programmers are women. I think that gives us a little bit of indication of that we have a lot more to do. This is of course mirrored in the video games sector as well. Our UK member, UK, which is the UK trade body for the video game sector, they recently launched a pledge, Raise the Games. And what I think is really important is that they did a industry-wide census on diversity in the video game sector. And here we can see that 70% of people working in the sector, they are male, and 28% are female. And at those 28%, the fraction of women working in the video game industry is significantly below the overall UK workforce, which is much higher. 21% of the UK video game industry is LGBTQ, which is significant higher proportion in national population estimates, which range between 3 and 7%. So in this area, the sector is apparently doing quite well, at least in the UK. The younger age group, they have more women and non-binary people. So 62% of people and are under 30 that are working in games, and that is compared with the 70% overall. So I hope that these data points are useful. This is something that we're also seeing from other territories across Europe. In Germany, the initiative Hier spielt Vielfalt. They are also increasingly looking at data in order to better understand the issue of importance of gender balance, and the similar things are also happening in France. But I'll stop there for the time being of the panel duration.
Merci beaucoup, Anne, pour toutes ces
Thank you very
informations.
much, Anne, for all of those figures and for your this
Ça fait des années
pan-European vision. So for years now, we have decried that 60% of players are women.
les questions de
and that should be taken into account, but also not only women, but also the LGBTQ community, as well as racial minorities, non-Caucasians. But also people, who might suffer from handicaps. So I think that if we really take a look at our players and their diversity, we see that it's not reflected professionally in the sector. And I think these figures really do speak for themselves. Now, of course, we do have some video game professionals who have to deal with these issues. And of course, since we do have such an interesting panel representing so many countries, we have Lena with us, who comes from Germany, Joanne, French, Astrid, who comes from Denmark.
Est-ce que vous pourriez nous dire quel est l'impact que vous vivez au quotidien de ces problématiques?
So just to put the question to you, how do you perceive this lack of diversity, and what are the consequences for you?
Tout le monde a le micro coupé.
Please don't forget to turn on your microphone. So any of our ladies, please?
Honnêtement, je pense moi, ce que je vois du côté créatif de tout ça, c'est que...
Personally, I think that in terms of creativity, the lack of representativity of diversity in video games will, of course, have an impact on the type of video games that we will have, of narration, of game design. We are stuck in a very stereotypical vision of the world, and I think that if we had more diversity, we would probably have more variety in terms of video games themselves and types of video games. So I think that this diversity deficit really does have an impact on the industry, on the sector, and then it also has repercussions on what we offer our public gamers. Sometimes I think we have we see that even though video games do continue to develop, but we do sort of perpetuate old clichés as well.
La communauté que d'un autre côté par on va dire par les jeux qui peuvent être eux-mêmes aussi attaqués, montrés du doigt, etc.
Donc, so I think that on the one hand, the very composition of our community can be, as professionals, can be decried, but also I think that there is some criticism to be leveled with regard to video games as well.
Est-ce que Léna ou Astrid...
So, Lena or Astrid, would you like to share your perspectives with us? I should have perhaps put the question directly to somebody instead of making an open question. I apologize for that. I think that, well, speaking as a French person, and I see this in women in games, I think that we really do concentrate on what's going on in France, but I think it's all the more interesting to see and to learn from,
Inclusivity.
To see how you perceive this issue of representativity and diversity in Germany or in Denmark as well.
I think it's not only in the games industry, but all industries where there's a lack of that the workplaces are less safe, because if there's only like one type of people, they will lack understanding of how other people's background and life are put together. And I think it's not only about the games we're creating and making those diverse and representing other kinds of narratives and stories and so on. It's also about creating workplaces where everyone can feel welcome and safe and accepted. In the games industry, I think a lot of young women especially are joining the industry, but how do we make sure that they stay when they start a family? So that's also a focus we should have internally in the industry. There's weird noises because I have a baby with me.
No problem.
Yes, I guess it's important to make the diversity visible, also in games, in workplaces, and in the society, of course, as well. So, yeah.
Ok. Donc, la Commission européenne a montré en présentant sa stratégie.
The Commission presented their strategy on diversity and LGBTQI inclusivity, and therefore they showed that for them this is now a priority. Why are we talking about this topic now? Is this something specific to the sector of video games? You were saying that this concerns all cultural sectors. There have been a lot of scandals in the sector of cinema, for instance, recently. Is there something specific to the sector of video games here?
This is Anne here. I think that each sector, clearly we see from data that there is a enormous gap in diversity, inclusion, equality in workplaces, just from a payment perspective, etc. We see that salaries are almost 20%, below for women, for example. Interestingly, I think we saw from the UK census is that the video games industry is rather good in LGBTI inclusiveness compared to other industries, and about the average of 30% of I would say gender equality, which is quite similar to other tech industries. I think each sector has its share of difficult working environment, and I think with what's happened in the cinema sector, what's also happened in to some extent also in the video game sector, I think that is also driving change, making companies, people, individuals also to react. And I think we're going to see a change and go towards much more inclusivity, diversity, equality, because I think it has to become mainstream, and we can see the trend that it is now doing that. But it's a very long-term process, of course, but initiatives like Women in Games, I think they are, and other initiatives as well, are absolutely key, that we get the information and awareness out about this, and that we can actually support companies and individuals that want to create that change and help them in doing so.
So I think we lost Fanny. I don't know. She had, I think she had a technical issue. So I'm ready to step in if Fanny is not there. Fanny, are you there? Nope, but she will jump in as soon as she's back.
C'est bon? Pardon, je sais pas du tout ce qui s'est passé.
Sorry, I have no idea what happened. Can you all hear me?
D'accord.
Passe la parole.
Je suis vraiment navrée, mon ordinateur.
I am absolutely sorry. My computer hadn't done this in its 2 years of existence, and it had to happen today.
Je ne sais pas si vous avez entendu la fin de la question.
I don't know if you heard the end of my question and whether Pierre-Etienne answered it. No, but Anne gave us some interesting additional information.
Sur le sujet, pourquoi cette
to insist a bit on this topic, why is the question of equality, how is it specific in the world of video games? Well, I believe that video games is a young sector, or a sector with a lot of young people at least. Well, that means there's a lot of turnover. This is complicated to manage, true. But I believe we are here talking also about simply groups of people who feel more interested in these topics, in these questions. And therefore, these topics are discussed on the workplace, are important to the teams in the workplace. And therefore, they have now become unavoidable discussions.
Pas juste sur le lieu de travail, elle est même
I believe
avant.
the problem does not happen exclusively on the workplace. It happens before that as well. It happens during the training, during the studies. So it happens at the moment of accessing the workplace.
Je parle en France.
Video game schools. I'm going to speak about the French situation here, but I believe it's true on a more global scale.
Exclusif, souvent.
These schools are pretty exclusive places. The training is generally quite expensive.
Des milieux quand même aujourd'hui.
And today,
qui recrutent encore sur ce pool.
These sectors are recruiting in a pool of mainly masculine applicants, and therefore they may not be very attractive to other identities.
Je voulais parler aussi du fait que la grosse différence.
I wanted to speak about the following. I believe that in the video game sector, the big difference is that there are communities that may not always be the case in cultural sectors. We have communities on Discord, on other places, and that is very specific to the sector of video game.
Du coup, en tant que créateur de contenu vidéoludique, il y a une certaine forme de responsabilité.
As a creator of video content, we have a certain responsibility. What do we show the players? What kind of topics do we discuss? And there I would like to ask Astrid in particular. I'd like to talk about what you are doing on this. I know that in your studio you do a lot of very interesting things, so please tell us a bit more about that.
Thank you. Yes, like when we started Triple Topping, my game studio, our goal was not to create a specific game. It was that we actually wanted to create the best workplace possible. We want it to be the best place to work in the games industry in Denmark. So because of this, we very early on, even when we were just 2 people and 3 people, had an employees handbook where we started to actively work on like how can we make sure that our workplace is safe for everyone and that it's diverse. And diversity not only in terms of 50% women and 50% men, and then we could check the box and say like this is perfect. But also like how can we create a workplace where everybody, no matter what kind of background they have or whatever they can maybe be struggling with in their personal life, would feel safe and included. And actually working with this have led us to take a lot of especially in Denmark, unique choices in terms of how we shape our workplace. One of them in terms of like including more women in the workspace is that we work less hours. Right now we work 32 hours per week. And this means that people have time to actually go and pick up the kids from daycare. And we still get the same amount of work done, but we are sure that if people do choose to start a family, that they can actually stay with our company and don't have to go look elsewhere. In Denmark, we lose a lot of programmers, especially to other tech industries where work conditions are better. So that was one of the choices. Another thing is, and that's very unique for Denmark, is that we don't have alcohol at the office, not even for a Friday bar or celebration or release party, whatever it can be. And that's because a lot of people, either because of cultural background or because of alcoholism, are struggling to be a part of an event with alcohol. So if I was to go every Friday and buy beers for everyone, there would maybe be 1 or 2 on my team who will be struggling and feeling included and safe in that space. So we just decided, let's not serve alcohol. We can make a lot of other social happenings. It's okay, of course, for the employees to go and have beers on a Friday if they choose so, but then it's like in the private spare time. So initiatives like that, and it's an active work you continually have to do, both like who you leading the company, but also actively together with your team of employees.
Je vais maintenant m'adresser à Lena pour.
I'm now going to ask Lena a question. I'm going to touch upon what Pierre-Etienne was saying. Oh, no, sorry. I'm going to ask Joanne a question first, sorry.
Non, pas encore.
Et ça me fait très plaisir que Pierre-Etienne ait effectivement abordé la question sociale et la question de l'éducation.
I'm very happy that we discussed, that Pierre-Etienne mentioned the social issues, the training issues.
En tant que, par exemple, ne serait-ce qu'en tant qu'auteur, en fait, je me rends compte que j'ai très peu de...
For instance, simply when I look at curriculums, I receive very few curriculums that are truly presenting a form of diversity. So this makes it complicated to create a team that is diverse.
On s'est effectivement rendu compte qu'un des problèmes venait...
When we started looking at this more in detail, we realized that one of the issues was the access to schools. These schools are quite expensive. I'm talking about something around 7,000 to 8,000 euros a year. And then, of course, the students also need to pay their rent, to pay for food.
Même pour les étudiants.
And the students also need to buy quite expensive software.
D'accès pour toute une tranche de la population.
And this means that these schools are not accessible for a big part of the population. If we want a more important diversity in our schools, more racial diversity, more gender diversity, and more social diversity, then we have to think about this starting at the training level. That's why we created a form of scholarship. We have received a lot of support there, and that scholarship allows us to finance the studies of a certain number of students from diverse backgrounds. We have students benefiting from it this year. We are hoping to increase that, and we are, of course, completely open to discussion with our European neighbors on the topic. It has been very complicated because of the whole pandemic situation, but we're very happy that this is going forward. Our scholarship goes through financial support, but as well through a mentoring system.
Et de production ou d'édition en France, eu de nombreuses personnes qui sont proposées pour être des mentors.
Have received a lot of offers from the sector, people who offer to be mentors, to act as mentors, to support our students psychologically, technically, to help them find internships. So through this initiative, we are trying to have an impact. Of course, this is a long-term impact. This is not going to be reflected in statistics in a couple of years, but we're hoping to see in 3-4 years our students arrive in companies, in the workplace. And the idea, of course, is not to do this only 1 year, but to do this every year.
Merci beaucoup, Joanne. Et vraiment.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and it's a brilliant initiative. And I hope that there will be a lot more of such initiatives. I went through video game school, so I'm very sensitive to this. And now I'm going to ask Lena. I'd like to talk about the situation after school. Of course, training is a main issue in the video game sector, but as we can see in Women in Games, even if we can have more women, more diversity in video game schools, even after the diploma, it's difficult to find a job and it's difficult to stay in a company as a
Est-ce que tu saurais me dire, Lena,
Lena, could you tell me a bit about what is being put in place, in particular with the Womanize project? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. Womanize is an action platform for mainly women and other minorities in the games industry. Womanize was founded in 2015, and it takes place every year during Games Week Berlin as a conference thingy. And therefore, we got in 2 options of including our attendees to workshops and also panel discussions and keynotes. And our main goal is, of course, that Womanize polish itself, but yeah, therefore it's a long way to go. And we want to show the diversity, inspiring person who doing their career in the games industry, to motivate young people to step into the games industry, to focus also on the people who are behind the games and not the one who always be on stage, of course. So that's one of our goals, to show diversity on different role models and not the role models and to give them a stage to show what we can do if we want to be more diverse in the industry, of course. That's our main focus for the Womanize project.
Ok. Merci beaucoup, Lena. C'est maintenant de nouveau à Pierre-Étienne.
I'm now going to ask a question to Pierre-Étienne once again. Would you like to talk a bit more about what the STGV and what Game Inclusivity do? I didn't know about them before this discussion, so could you tell us a bit more about them? STGV is a French union for video game players. For workers in the video game sector, sorry.
Les aspects de la carrière, donc ça commence.
So our role is to follow people at every step of their career. So we're starting with students. That's why we've been talking about these tools.
Avec les personnes qui travaillent sur le jeu vidéo.
We then work with people who work in the video game sector, so in the studios.
Et
in addition, houses everywhere. And of course, the question has been raised of people working in streaming. Do streamers, are they part of workers in the video game sector? In my opinion, yes, they are.
Pas évident,
especially as there's a very complicated power relationship with big platforms and these streamers.
source de revenus très facilement.
These big platforms can take their source of income away very easily, so this is something we need to be vigilant about.
Les problématiques d'égalité, elles ressortent, hein, donc j'ai parlé
And
des
here,
écoles.
of course, the question of equality, of diversity is essential.
On voit très bien que, par exemple,
It's
les premières...
particularly true, for instance, in streaming.
Game Workers Unite, en fait, c'est une...
Game Workers Unite, this is an initiative that was born at the AGDC in 2018.
La naissance du STJV.
That happened very little after the creation of a French syndicate, a French union.
De syndicaliser l'industrie.
The idea was to unionize the video game industry.
Nord-américaine.
Initially, this initiated with Northern American audiences mainly. Now this is a global network.
Parce que là, je parle...
Our conclusion is the following, as the legal frameworks are very different from one country to the next, for instance, between the Anglo-Saxon world and France. Even inside Europe, we have very different practices, legal frameworks, or union cultures. This means there cannot be one centralized direction. So now we have to see it more as a federation of unions and not one global union.
En France et en Europe,
we have several unions in France. We have several different unions from Europe that are represented in this global network.
Je crois qu'on a le temps pour une dernière question.
I think we still have time for one last question. I'm now going to ask Astrid.
On a survolé parce que bien sûr 1 heure de conférence c'est très court pour parler.
An hour is way too short to discuss such an ample topic, but we talked a bit about training. We talked a bit about the situation in the workplace, how to recruit and represent more diversely, how to have more diverse role models. But here's my question, Astrid.
Toi qui du coup met en place énormément de choses.
Implement a lot of initiatives inside your own studio. Do you think that this has an impact on the types of video games you create in your studio? Why is it important, even as a player, not just as an actor of the industry, to focus on these topics?
It has a huge impact on the games we're creating. So Welcome to ELK that we released recently is based on true stories. And some stories are told by my family, so of course we use those, but we wanted to have a sincerity in the game, and we wanted to have a game that could represent many different situations. And in order to do that, we used a lot of stories from the team as well. And it's not only like fun stories that you could sit at a bar. It's also stories about how it is to be a woman and traveling on your own, how it is to experience discrimination and so on. And in order to create that in a way in the game so people could understand and put themselves in that situation, people on our team had to be openly sharing stories and life experience about rape and discrimination. And we would not have been able to do that if we haven't created a safe and inclusive workspace. We have one scene in the game that is about sexual harassment. It's actually a story my mom told, but of course everybody on the team helped create the scene as uniquely as possible. And we had so many women from all over the world reaching out and telling us that this was exactly explaining these kind of situations, and it's the first time they actually saw it portrayed in a game in a way where they could see the lines to how it happens in real life as well. So it is really, really important to have a focus on diversity and safe space in the workspace, I would say, in order to create unique video games and unique narratives.
Merci beaucoup pour ces réponses. Je vais me permettre, j'espère que ça ne te gênera pas, Joanne, mais je vais me permettre de citer.
I will now quote what you said during in early 2020 at the Pegasus event just before confinement. You said that for more different video games, we needed more difference inside video game studios, and I believe this was the topic of this roundtable. Thanks to all of you for your participation, for all you contributed here. And of course, there's still a lot of things that we need to discuss. I hope that soon enough we will no longer need structures like Women in Games and Womanize, and that we'd have moved forward enough not to need such actions anymore. But in the meantime, we will keep fighting. And so please follow all our inspiring participants on social media.
À suivre toutes ces personnes sur les réseaux sociaux. Et moi, je vous laisse, je redonne la parole.
Now I'm going to give the floor back to Domenico for the next roundtable, and thank you so much for listening.
Merci Fanny, et merci aux intervenants du panel. Beaucoup de choses que j'ai gardées de ces discussions et qui vont certainement...
Thank you very much, Fanny, and thank you very much to everyone who participated in the roundtable, in the panel.
Switching back to English, because the next video that we will show you is in English. We thought that it was interesting to introduce the next panel with a short video promoting one of the great European models. So we had an international model that is Quebec before, and now we will switch to Sweden, interesting country that is functioning a little bit differently from other countries that are represented today, like Germany or France, just to name those few. So I will ask the technical side to just launch the video, and I will talk to you afterwards.
J'ai lui, j'ai qui maintenant?
Anton.
Il est seul avec lui?
Avec Ina Goring.
Ina,
il y a de nouveau
elle est où Ina?
Jeanne.
Ok.
Il y a encore
Jeanne, ok. Et
Pauline Augrand et Thierry Beaujard.
Thierry, il est où?
Oui, voilà.
Ok, c'est parti.
I'm just here to check my video. Hi.
Hello.
The light's weird. I would change that.
On profite aussi pour faire un petit test technique.
Ça marche, Pauline, on t'entend bien, on t'entend bien.
Bien, merci.
Dis-moi quand est-ce qu'elle s'arrête? Tu le sais?
Là, bientôt.
Je pense qu'on n'a pas Thierry par contre.
Là, c'est la fin. Voilà.
Okay, so welcome back for the second roundtable of this afternoon, LabEurope 2020. It's happening now. This time we will discuss the financing, so the nerve of every industry, money. We will discuss the financing of indie games with our amazing international speakers, starting with someone from Sweden. So Anton Albin will be with us. He is project manager at the Association of Swedish Game Developers. Ina Göring is also with us from Germany. She's manager funding game at the German Game Industry Association. Pauline Augrand from CNC France. She's the head of digital. And last but not least, Thierry Beaujard, founder of Spielfabrik, a collaboration between France and Germany. So since we got an intervention from Sweden, a video from Sweden, I'm sorry, but I think, do you hear some parasite sound? I think there's a microphone that is on the technical side. So if you can switch it off, that's it. Great, thanks. We will follow up on Sweden with you, Anton. So welcome everyone. Anton, I think you've seen that video more than once. I mean, you were the one suggesting it afterward. But there's something about Sweden that is, as I said before, quite different from all of the models that I've seen in Europe. I would say that it's maybe less, the industry is maybe less dependent on public money. And when it comes to the video game industry, we are used, especially, I'm sitting in Belgium, but we have Germany, we have France that are represented here today. We have also other countries, public institutions that are here as well. In your opinion, do you see any reason for that? Or is it a question of culture? Or as it was said before, I think schools are also a big part of that. It was said before for the gender equality panel that access to those schools is not always guaranteed and easy in other countries. But what is the situation in Sweden? Please enlighten us.
So I would say the Swedish games industry has grown organically, straight out of a passion of making things through computers. So it actually started with the demo scene in the 90s, together with demo scenes in Finland and Germany and other countries. And out of that, we got our first companies like DICE that later made Battlefield and games like that. So I would say and that's kind of been the nature of the Swedish games industry. It's grown out of a passion for games and inventions and that kind of culture of inventing, experimenting, creating with technology, which I would say has been a cultural trait for Sweden for more than 200 years, with that kind of technical invention. So I would say that might be one cultural quirk. We also have long dark winters, and we stay a lot indoors and stuff like that. So
there is a correlation with Canada in that sense. I mean, it's also a very cold country with very long winters. And as we know with COVID right now, the more you are forced to stay indoor, the more the video game market is striving. So there's probably a lot of studies that will be made on that topic. Now, I have a question for you, Ina. The German Game Association has quite a panoramic view on the national, but also the international video game market. You guys are organizing the Gamescom, for example. That is one of the biggest international marketplaces we have in this industry in Cologne.
Correct.
Yeah, it's correct up to now. I was reading, I think it was even on your website, that the video game market in Germany has substantially increased during the sanitary crisis. We are talking about more than 20%. But I guess the push also came from the federal government that in 2019 has introduced a new input to the budget. I mean, there's a new federal support for video games. Is it too early, or do you guys already have some effects of that measure on the industry?
Yeah, it's actually too early to really measure the effect, because there have been 2 phases of installing the brand new, or it's not so brand new, but fairly new federal games fund. It actually had a first pilot round last year already in 2019, but this was still under like the not Brussels notified circumstances. So it was like a de minimis range, only 200K per company project, basically. And it was only late September during Gamescom that the big, like the no cap fund was announced. So actually it's already, it's just in place since 6 weeks, basically, you can apply, the German company. So yeah, we don't have any effects yet. But as you can imagine, you know, every year there's a budget of 50 million euros, and that's for project funding. So that's either production or prototype funding. Those are the 2 phases that are being funded. But yeah, of course, we do expect a lot of growth. And this was, of course, the aim that our government had. You know, there were 2 scopes. Like, we wanted to increase our, we wanted to be on the level playing field, because as you all know, Canada and France and UK, they have really great supporting programs, and we were lacking this in Germany on a national level. So we want to really be on the level playing field, and also, of course, we want to increase the number of companies, the number of projects made in Germany, and essentially, of course, grow the market as a whole. But you were mentioning were you mentioning the COVID numbers, like the growth from the last? Yeah, this was just, I would say, just COVID and not the funding yet, because this is a number how the market grew, and this is like the market also meaning like the consumption of games. So rather our industry, it's more like the general consumption. And yes, I mean, of course, it's great numbers. It's 27%. That's pretty amazing growth, but you always have to remember that most of the times this goes not back to the German game companies, the small and intermediate companies, because this is big games, big multiplayer online games. Those were the games that are being played during the pandemic. So yeah, I mean, it's a growth overall, but it's not directly going to the German games industry, meaning like the developers.
Yeah, but I guess when players are playing, they just want to play a good game, and they are not always considering the nationality of the game. So the more mass we have in a country, the more word of mouth,
true,
and, the more community we manage to gather around video game.
Yeah.
So also, sorry, I have to apologize that I forgot to mention that Joanne is still with us. She was part of the previous panel. So Joanne is still the founder of Spider Studio, and you are also a producer, so you have totally a lot to say in this panel as well, and I will have questions for you too. What I want to add to what Ina just said is, well, the video game industry seems to be lucky, because the numbers that I was giving before this increase, it's not only software, it's also hardware. We haven't talked much about hardware companies, but of course new console are being released right now. So PlayStation 5, Xbox S, all that will contribute to the expense of the video game market, and it's all happening now. Pauline, I have a question for you. So CNC has been increasingly provided support to the game producers over the last years. How much are we talking about? Because, of course, Ina mentioned the 50 million, and this was kind of a really strong number for Europe. I mean, the whole world was talking about it, not only German companies, but CNC has been focusing on support for also a long time. And are you guys having a strategy that favors, let's say, more development and production, or do you have like a panoramic approach of this industry? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oui, tout à fait. Je peux m'exprimer en français? Ça,
Oui,
bien, ok. Alors oui, effectivement, nous, on a une certaine antériorité en fait en France sur le soutien public aux jeux vidéo, puisque les toutes premières
France, we had a bit of a head start after the crash of the internet bubble. We saw that the government did swoop in to assist the industry. So historically, that's how things happened in France. So we came up with two major support mechanisms that began in 2008. So a tax credit and a second initiative. So basically in 12 years, things have evolved considerably in terms of the volume of investment. For 2019, 2020, we're talking about the video games tax credits. We're talking about 40 to 50 million euros per year. Now, we also have individual selective aid for different development and production. And in 2020, we're talking about an annual budget of around 30 million euros. So we're talking about 4.5 million euros for 2021. Because of course the tax credit was conceived for different types of games. So we're talking about big budget game production, but also smaller productions, smaller businesses. We see a considerable percentage of our games, of the games that we support, that have been supported, have a budget of 10 million euros or over. Although of course we're also dealing with, we're also working with some projects that whose budget is under 1 million. So as you see, we really are active across the board. Approximately half of the businesses that are receiving selective targeted aid have been active for just under 3 years. So obviously, this sort of financial support is crucial in these, first years for their development. So it's aid that that is also determined based on their financial possibilities at any given moment. And it does, with these targeted aids, but which is not the case with the tax credits, what we try to achieve is ensuring that these smaller studios are able to hang on to the copyrights, and to the intellectual property of their games. So that's basically how both of these approaches come together. So we know that the coming years will be wrought with challenges, new challenges, and I think that we will also have to be concentrating on addition, because we have production studios and development studios in France that are working quite well, that are very dynamic, very proactive, and but perhaps on the editing side, that's where we see the Achilles heel of the French industry. So that's what we would like to support a bit more in the future.
Have just tackled two of the topics that are really at the center of your activity. The first thing is that, as Pauline was mentioning, well, it's great to have new studios that are coming for support. You're not a new studio anymore. You're not sitting in a new studio. You have a lot of experience, but you've been a new studio. And when we were discussing, you were mentioning that most of the times, I mean, a lot of times, when a young company is trying to build up the first game, they are just trying to finance that game, and they are less thinking about the sustainability of the company, like how do they follow up to the success of or not of that game. And sometimes focusing on the financing of a game can be disastrous, because the company has to be sustainable and come up with a second title and a third title and an activity that will last. So you've been through that. Can you let us know a little bit how you handled this duality?
C'est effectivement quelque chose d'assez courant dans l'industrie.
Well, it's actually, yes, what you're saying is quite well known in the industry. It's a recurrent situation. So we have to be very flexible. On the one hand, we try to raise funds from available national funds, basically. In France, it's centered around the regions. But as a studio, we know that it is important to look to the future and to be able to anticipate with our projects, to be able to anticipate development, dealing, of course, with vertical space. With the tax credit that we heard about, it's just such an enormous help, because it does show the state's commitment from the state. So in terms of our financing, of course, since it's a tax credit, it's not direct aid, it does demand that we keep an eye on the future, and that we project ourselves in the short, medium term. So we were lucky to have an amazing team of founders and who were capable of being active on all fronts to ensure sustainability, really. So we carried out small technical missions. We worked with other studios. We worked with porting from one console to another. Editing precisely as well. So instead of just working on one platform, we would try to ensure that our games would be present and available for several gaming platforms. So it's not I think this is a way forward that sort of anticipates and is able to get around gridlock, really, and cul-de-sacs. Of course, we can't really count on royalties, and we can't really count on our revenue to finance our future development. But what we really want to do is just basically try and be as present as we can in the sector. It really is a balancing act, but if we don't anticipate, there is a lot of risk involved. And we see that many studios who manage to come up with great projects, and they just go under because precisely because they weren't able to anticipate as much as they should have. So Thierry, with the Spielfabrik, you're working on two fronts, in France and in Germany. So are you based on basically co-production? Are you sharing intellectual property and copyrights when you have two different studios in two different countries cooperating?
Handling the financing part and all the hassle that Johan was just mentioning, is it also your purpose to do this, to help the studios, the young studios to do this with your own experience and your own, I would say, your own portfolio of investors?
Thank you, Domenico, and hello to everyone. So yes, Spielfabrik is twofold. We are working mainly between France and Germany with on one side, one acceleration program to support studios from France and Germany to work really on the business side. So as you just talked about in terms of financing, monetization, marketing, publishing, etc. And then on the other side, we developed 4 years ago this idea of developing more co-production, because by taking this project, the studios from France and Germany, we discovered that in fact they were not working together. And what we had in mind in a very naive way to say, okay, we'll have studio from France and Germany, they will develop project together. Doesn't happen, okay? So we started to say, okay, we need to develop a co-production marketplace, to bring people who want to work together, to develop project together. It's not necessarily doesn't have to be just on between France and Germany. I think the first concept is to say, okay, it seems to me that video game studios are mostly working alone. They are working on their own. I think I don't know, it's a cultural thing, or they are not so used to collaborate. Of course, they have some experts, they have some people they work with, but they don't really use this idea of collaboration. They say, okay, I've got an idea of a game and I'm doing this game. And the idea is to open that, to say, okay, why don't you collaborate with other people? Also to say what Joanna just said, in terms of spreading the risk, instead of saying, okay, we're going to hire now 50 people for the game for 18 months. Why don't we have some part and we just work with other people? So it's what happened for a long time, this kind of work for hire. Basically, you subcontract to another studio, that works as well. The idea with co-production is on top of that to share this idea of IP and revenues, okay? So it's of course a big question mark for many studios to understand what does it mean to give up some part of the IP. For example, what we said with Pauline from the CNC, okay, the studio has to keep the IP. Which part of the IP? How can we share this IP and then the revenue. So it's a long discussion that people have. And what we do is we organize every year this co-production market, which takes place in Strasbourg, or this year online. And this year we invited Belgian friends as well to take part of that. And we may open to other countries next year, but the idea is to get studios from both sides and develop some co-production. And this year we had I think we're coming to a kind of interesting timing and moment where we had this year 15 studios, and we have already 5 projects that are in development for co-production, which means at least 2 studios per project. So we have more than, 10 projects, 10 studios part of that. And people are really interested because they've never been into this situation of pitching to other studios and see how they can work together. It's not so simple, but they are looking into
this
that.
is the fact that you are promoting that. Do you think that this is something that is coming more from the film side? Because we know that European co-production in terms of film and audiovisual in general is kind of a common practice. Also, the funding system have learned to work together so that they can assemble the budgets. In games, this is not exactly the same culture.
It's not the same culture, completely agree. But if you look at, for example, animation, which may be a bit closer, even more than film to game, I think they are using, obviously, a lot of co-production for other reasons, because, of course, it's based on, license, on territories, etc. So I don't think we can go into this kind of very large co-production that we have in animation. But I think in games, we see that the more we talk to the studios about that and what does it bring, in terms of access to expertise, access to funding, access to marketing, etc. I think people start to understand that, okay, it's another way. I mean, I'm not saying that it's replacing everything. I think there are still some ways to do it directly with publisher, etc. But I think it's a way to spread the risk. And for me, it's a way to get a better negotiation position as well towards publisher as well. If you're coming to 2 studios, developing the stories together, having more funding, it's maybe more, you get maybe a better deal with a publisher than if you are just alone and try to do everything
yes,
alone.
Thank you, Thierry. Anton, on this topic of the collaboration, I mean, we know that the Nordic countries are usually collaborating on several things. I mean, you also have funds that are cross-country just for the region. How is it going on with games? Because, for example, I worked with several studios. I know Avalanche in Sweden. We were mentioning IP. Avalanche is used also to take IPs from other publishers and just develop the game as a servicing company. I don't know what kind of rights they have in that case. But are there collaboration? So this is one example of collaboration with one Swedish studio that is taking over an IP that is coming from somewhere else. But do you have examples of collaboration, successful example of collaboration between a Swedish company and, let's say, I don't know, a Finnish company or a Norwegian company?
Definitely. I would say there are several successful attempts of that. For example, Rovio Stockholm or Rovio Sweden, that was started a few years back. They made an Angry Bird game that happened to become Angry Birds 2, which is the most successful Angry Birds game. So I would say that crossovers, or not crossovers, but collaborations like that can be the most successful. Also, we've seen like IO Interactive, the Danish AAA company, starting a new office in Malmö. They're making the new James Bond game, I think, 007, Project 007 or something. So a lot of interesting collaborations like that. I think there's an element of sharing where you have to show yourself kind of vulnerable and collaborate with somebody that's different than you. That's very healthy in a creative medium. So I think there's a lot to gain from those kind of collaborations.
Yes, I will give you the floor, Thierry, but I just have a question for Ina first. Ina, in terms of, because Pauline was mentioning some of the requests, and by the way, it would be interesting, Pauline, to come afterwards on how many of those requests the CNC is receiving, how many projects are kept in every session of a year, because we haven't spoken about that, but there are definitely a lot of demands and not a lot of elected projects. But Ina, Pauline was mentioning games that are not really independent anymore, in the sense that, yes, in the sense the definition that she gave, that they keep the IP makes them independent. But we know in the video game industry that we have indie games and we have AAA games, and it's comparable to the blockbusters and independent cinema, auteur cinema in the audiovisual industry. But would you say that Germany, in terms of representation of both sector, is balanced, or are you focusing with the national fund, with the federal fund, but also with the regional funds, on the more smaller companies that need a bigger push?
Actually, no, we do. In Germany, we have a very large variety of indie game companies. So they're actually, I don't know how many percent, but that's the majority of companies, how they exist. So small and medium-sized enterprises. And I would rather say we do have a lack of AAA companies. So the program was invented to also attract, AAA companies to Germany, either, have put like a headquarter to Germany or start a new company, of course. But I mean, it definitely aims to everyone, because the boundary where you can enter this is for example, if you want production support, it starts when your project is worth 100,000 K. So this is already, aimed for independent studios. But since there's no gap, you can like literally also get, millions, like 10 million, 8 million, 5 million for project 2. So there's no gap. So you can see it aims to everyone. And and of course, that's the main goal, probably, is to really cater everyone from small to big. And since there's no cap, this shall be possible.
But I guess you also are submitted to European rules. Probably 50% of the project has to be, maximum 50% of the project has to come from public money, and you cannot, you have to invest equity and also private money as well.
Yes.
Pauline, in terms of projects that are submitted to CNC for every session, do you have like an average, and how many projects are you supporting every year?
Oui, en gros, chaque année, quand on cumule crédit d'impôt et aide sélective, c'est une centaine de nouveaux projets de jeux vidéo.
So basically, on a yearly basis, we're able to support around 100 new projects, mostly. I mean, it's evenly distributed from targeted aid and plus the tax credits. I think that what you were saying, getting back to independence, I think that independence really stems from the fact that we do create a context in which smaller actors are able to maintain their independence. So that really just sort of ensures everyone's independence in the end. And we do, of course, afford the possibility for many of these smaller companies to evolve and to close the gap, becoming, first of all, a medium-sized company, and ultimately they might even be able to evolve further. But our way of financing also avoids too much dependence or too much of a loss of independence when dealing with the game console manufacturers, game system manufacturers. So we try to concentrate on aid to structure, to the business itself, to ensure that when we're done supporting any given company, it's on a much more solid footing, which also guarantees its independence. We do that with different instances. In France, with the Bank for Public Investment and BPI France as well. Once again, this is support that goes directly to individual businesses. We just launched an accelerator project with BPI France specifically for video games, in order to help around 20 small video game producers and studios that are making the leap to become more, mid-sized studios. Now, of course, this also is something that is a dynamic that we've been observing with regards to cinema and the audiovisual sector on the whole. But given the current context and the pandemic, I think that this holds true for France, but also for Europe as a whole, that European collaboration is crucial to the further development and evolution of our sector, but also of individual studios and companies. I totally agree with what Thierry was saying. What we have to ask ourselves why we aren't seeing more development in this sense.
Markets is that you have a developer, a graphic designer, they get together and they want to make a game and they think they have a company, but they don't have a company because a company is another spirit, it's another mindset, it's being an entrepreneur, it's being able to raise financing, to do a lot of marketing, pitch your project in a convincing way. And Thierry, you are working also with new studios, like what we would call startups, companies that are starting with all this. Do you feel that there's a lack, because Pauline was just mentioning the support for companies in terms of structure? Do you think that the companies that you are discussing with, that you are working with, have this lack of structure, and how are you helping them to be more efficient?
Yes, I mean, definitely, I can only support what Pauline said. I think that's the main problem at the moment, is really to develop helping them on the structure. I mean, making a game today is very simple. It's not very expensive, it's very simple. The problem is to survive, to do more games, and to grow and to scale up, and that's what we need today. We can't just say, okay, we're doing a game and it's nice, etc. And the people we are working with, the typical profile, I would say, is people who've done 1 or 2 games. And they come to us and they say, okay, we've done 1 or 2 games, it was fun. Well, in fact, it was not fun, we didn't sell any, and it was a nightmare. And now, but we know now what to do. We know the points to be careful at, and then we're helping them to develop that further and having this link on the structural point of view. But of course, today, the problem is most of the public money is on projects. So it's good to hear that Pauline is working on that, because that's, I think, what is really needed. So the way we have to do it ourselves is to start on project, because that's where the money is. And that's why we are interested in this co-production model, because at least we put, we as I say, we limit the risk and we put people together. So they are a bit stronger together than alone. But yes, the next step is really to go into structural funding, company financing. And that's, of course, what most of venture capital, private equity people want. They don't invest in games. They invest in studios, I mean, in companies. And we see now with the pandemic that many investors looked at game studios because it's very resilient to the crisis compared to other things. So it's really the question now, what sort of instruments can we create to get this kind of structural development? And again, co-production is one way to start going into that direction, to say, I'm not alone, I'm not doing everything alone, I work with other people and I'm building something, and I meet maybe an entrepreneur from my region or from another country to work together.
Thank you. And Joanne, maybe it's interesting to mention now that Spiders, you sold the company, I think it was this year or last year, I don't remember, but it's quite recent.
Oui, c'était l'année dernière, oui, en septembre dernier.
Yes, congratulations.
Yes, it was last September.
But this also raised a topic that to be able to sell a company, you are not only selling the games that are in the portfolio of the company, you also sell the savoir-faire, the know-how of the company, the robust architecture of the company, the eventual tools that you have created in the company, like engines or infrastructures that you are using to create your games. But if we take the model like Thierry was exposing, let's say that you would have been in co-productions with other companies, do you think it would have been more complicated to sell your studio if the rights would have been shared between, I'm talking IP now, between you and other studios?
Oui, évidemment. D'ailleurs, c'est un petit peu notre cas, c'est-à-dire qu'on n'a pas effectivement de droit
Yes, and actually, that was a bit of the problem we've been facing. We had some shared rights, not with other studios, but with our then editor. And this implied very complicated negotiations later on, so that we could recuperate some of these rights. It implied complicated negotiations to recuperate the IPs. But one thing is absolutely true, the market is changing. Developers now, when they reach a certain size, they receive a lot of proposals to buy their project. And I think this was initiated by the arrival on the market of new actors like distribution platforms, thinking about Amazon, Google, things like that. They created a certain fear, which is mirroring, I believe, what happened with the cinema industry. People are afraid to see all the content produced and created be absorbed by such platforms. So traditional creators are worried. And I believe this is what generated this attempt of absorbing different studios. It creates a form of concentration. Until then, mid-sized studios would not have interested big editors or big platforms, but today they're being courted and desired. In that way, content production is guaranteed. And the know-how of those studios is, as you were saying, bought in the same way as IPs are. And but however, it's a sector where it's still quite complicated. I'm going now to escape your question a little, but as it was said before, for younger developers, it's difficult to project in the future. Thierry was saying it very well. Creating a game is not that difficult. I mean, it's not easy either. Of course, many parts are difficult, but the main difficulty for a studio comes later. In general, studios are created by developers, and these people have true passion for video games. They have a strong creative energy, but they're not financial experts. However, they're trying to remain independent. They're very worried about losing a part of their creativity, of their passion and their energy if they open their company to more financial profiles or even to traditional investors. And that can lead studios to believe that they have financial competence when they don't. Sometimes they do. Great when that happens, but it can be useful to have a true professional accountant or to cooperate with a cabinet that can guide the studio on these topics. It's not because your developer is excellent and your ideas are brilliant that you do not need any help on any topic. And I think this message needs to be heard by the indie game industry. Don't just base your project on your own competence to develop a game. Those are certainly true. But you also need to focus on labor rights. You need to focus on research, on finding financial aid and support. You can contact independent professionals on this. You can go through clusters. There are mentoring projects that exist. I know at least a few that exist in France. I'm sure that at the European level, there are many of those. You can turn to organizations. You're not alone here. You're not alone in your situation, and developing your game. The period where that happened, that's over. So you need to be ready to reach out to find help. you can ask other studios who can have excellent advice, or turn to different type of organizations that exist at the national level. Thank you.
With structural funding for companies, I mean, do you feel that it is the structure of the company is balanced with the quality of the projects that are being supported, or do you have the impression that there's some efforts still to be made to increase this entrepreneurship and to increase this this mentality of raising money and sustaining your own company? Or on the other hand, do you feel that Germany has enough investors that are, when I'm speaking about investors, I'm talking about specific investor for that sector, because that's also something that sometimes happen. You get generic investors that are having different expectations, and the video game industry has its own way to play ball. So can you tell us a little bit the situation in Germany?
So first of all, of course, we are talking about a lot of project funding in Germany and all over Europe. But I have to say, in every project funding, they will always evaluate the companies. They will always evaluate the team that's behind it. So they never just like looking only put a focus on the project, but they will do. I mean, it's very important, you know, who will create the project. Can they do it? What's the experience level? And if they're youngsters and startups, where did they go, you know, and get the training, or do they have maybe mentors? So that's always taken into account. Like, you cannot see project funding only as like the single focus on the project. But of course, we are speaking about collaboration, and when you come to the investor side, I mean, the games industry is super global. I mean, of course, we have a German games industry and a French games industry, but they're all so connected. I mean, they work with companies, service companies, literally all over the world. There's teams where everybody sits remote. So and when it comes to investors and publishers, there is not like a closed German investor market or European investors market, but it's basically the world. You know, when I was working before for a regional fund, I had projects that had investors from Asia, they had publishers from Australia, which they met in events in the United States. So I have to, like, just to put an emphasis, this is just also like an exaggerated challenge for the developers, that they're always facing a global market, not always, you know, only concerning that the games, the products are always, you know, enter a game like a global market. You know, it's not like a German movie that kind of enters the German movie market and then you sell the rights to different. You always publish to like a mobile platform or to Steam if it's a PC game, for example. So it's immediately out in the whole wide world, and that always, you know, also comes to the investors. So I think it's a huge challenge, and of course, startups need guidance and mentorship. How do you, you know, work with all this, you know, all the different investors and publisher that can be global? I mean, you know, you can, of course, start global, like local and regional, but yeah, for sure, you can also, you know, they could come from everywhere. So it's hard to say how does the German investor scene look like, because I mean, it does exist. I would say, especially in Berlin, which is overall like a kind of a, you know, tech digital startup hub. So you have investors that invest in those industries, and they have a side look, like Thierry said, what's going on in the games industry. So I mean, there is investors. Of course, it's just really the challenge to find the right one and the right kind of investment. So that's why the funding systems in Europe from the national states is so important for independent companies, because it's, you know, it kind of gives them an anchor and some money to start with, some people that speak their language, and give them advice. So, and from that you can build as a company.
But the recent 50 millions that were included in the budget are just for projects, or I mean video game projects, or if you have a project, let's say, of an incubator or an accelerator that is related to game or specific to game, are you eligible as well?
No, this fund is dedicated to the either prototyping or production of games.
Okay, thank you. Anton, what is the situation? So Ina just mentioned prototyping. We all know that it's quite an important stage because it's the first thing that you will see, and seeing is everything. Projection is really difficult even for professionals. So the vertical slice demo, as we call it, do you have like specific funding just for that stage that is more the most risky stage of the project, where you have to invest on a project that might not happen? Is it something that is organized at the state level or at the regional level? How does it work in Sweden?
No, we don't have that. I wish we did. It would definitely have been, it would be a perfect thing to have in the games industry. But we don't have such a fund. The closest thing that I can think of is the Creative Europe fund that we all share. I don't know what the status will be the upcoming years. Maybe you can fill me in on that. But no, we don't have a structure for that. I think the structure that I would say is in place would be things like Nordic Game Jam and different game jams throughout the Nordic region and in Sweden have been very, very useful for, and that kind of culture of creating together and trying stuff out. But there is no fund for creating a vertical slice for a bigger project or anything like that. But we've definitely seen a lot of cool projects out of these game jams, like Goat Simulator, for example, and Totally Accurate Battle Simulator and stuff like that.
But what about the schools? Do they have the budget to also invest on those prototypes, like school projects? Is it something that is common in Sweden? I know that I was in Skellefteå and schools there were doing that, so financing some of the projects of the students to be able to launch them on the market later on.
Right. Yeah, that would be that is a really good asset for a startup. Some municipalities have incubators or support programs for new companies, and there is at least in Skövde and some other university cities, there is a know-how of games and acceptance of games as a viable business, and you can actually get some support regionally and locally. So I think that's been a huge part of why those cities have become game hubs. There are from time to time there has been in some municipalities or in some areas there you've probably been able to get a grant here and there, but nothing to actually make a prototype. Maybe like 5,000 euros as a support for PR here and there, but there's no way of making a game on a grant like that. But.
All right. Thierry, when it comes to Spielfabrik, now it's existing for a certain amount of times. You guys have results. What is your debrief of all that? When you compare the projects that are entering the Spielfabrik and the ones that are coming out, what is your rate of success? Do you have any also success stories to share with us? Is it working?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I mean, most of the time, of course, we start with the people with having a new game in mind. So we're helping them on that. And for, I would say, more than 30–40% of them, they manage to finance their game the year after. So basically, when they leave the program, because our program is 9 months. So most of the time they come and they say, yes, the game will be released in the next 6 months. Well, the reality is that it's released about 18 months later, so after that. But we have a good rate of that. We've had some co-production. We've done 3 co-production between France and Germany. And I think the main point is really about the publishing problem. And also it's coming back to what also Pauline said about publisher. I mean, young studios are really thinking, okay, we want to publish ourselves, and they are really against publisher because they're scared of losing their IP, they are scared of losing the control, etc. And I think what we're helping them as well is to understand how they can build their their project and their company, etc., to have, again, as I say, a better negotiation situation with a publisher. Because many of them, pitch to publisher, and most of publishers say always, yes, it could be interesting. And then, because they always leave the door open, I would say. And then when they actually get some contract, it's very disappointing, because obviously they understand that they will not lose the control. I don't think it's really the main issue, but basically not making any money out of it. So I think the main difficulty we have is not really to do the game, to help them to finance the game. I mean, of course, there are some mechanisms. We help them to access that, and it's working quite well. I mean, we have also some very active regions in both countries that are interested in the companies who go through Spielfabrik, I must say. I mean, for example, in Bordeaux, the 3 companies we had last year, they all got financing from the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region. So, that is working. The question is how to, through that, to get to the right publisher, because we really believe that they should work with publishers. So change their mindset as well about that. But also I think the publishers have to change as well their mindset to be able to work with this kind of new young companies who have some good ideas, who are trying. And of course, they want to have an interesting deal. So for us, it's really a lot about not really anymore the financing, because I think that's where, and also with the 50 million in Germany, of course, it helps. But it's more about making sure that they can survive and get some interesting partner, like good publishers.
So it's an interesting thing. I mean, the third roundtable that we will have after this one is about publishing. So I will not elaborate too much on that. We will have the opportunity to discuss it. And also one of the projects from Spielfabrik is part of the next panel as well.
Yes.
So they will tell us about their experience. But in the case of Belgium, for example, because I'm also representing One Image, that is a funding body for games, we have supported several projects that were not helmed by producers. They were helmed by what I was telling before, like developers, technical people that just have a good idea and they want to structure the company around that. And when I was recommending them to publishers, the publisher most of the time was coming back to me and said, okay, these guys are not producers, so they don't really have like the vision of the market as it should be, and it's very difficult to talk with them because they basically don't understand what we are doing, what we are able to do with them. So I wonder if it's a typical Belgian situation, or if, for example, in Germany you have the same problem, in Sweden, or you, Thierry.
Just quickly about that, I mean, it's exactly what I said. When they arrive in the program, that's the idea they have. And they don't understand how a publisher works and what it's looking for. And they say, okay, we're going to publish ourselves because we don't want a publisher. And our job is really to help them as well to understand why they need partners and they need a good publisher at the end to get to that. So I don't think it's something specific to Belgium, but it's really this process that is taking time. That's why I think at the moment it's really a key point, this question of publisher. But as I say, on the other side, the publishers also need to change, I think. They need to change. They need to change in what they propose. All this marketing part, for example. If they do, for example, a co-production, they will need less money from a publisher, but more marketing. So the publishers really have to be good at marketing and not just say, we give a little bit of money and we'll do some marketing and that's it.
Yes, of course. And Joanne, you wanted to say something? Since you have this producer profile, do you think that it's lacking in France? I mean, or do you feel that now, because there's not really education for that, I mean, you can not really go to school and learn how to be a game producer.
Oui, effectivement. En tout cas, ça me faisait sourire parce qu'il y a
yes,
toujours...
absolutely. Made me smile because I know there's a rivalry between publishers and developers. Exists this rivalry can be a financial rivalry. In general, publishers take the biggest part of royalties in the end. So, of course, some very honest publishers do exist, and it's a pleasure to work with them, and this will stay the case. Others have the reputation of not paying proper royalties, not declaring the right amount of sales to the developers so that they don't have to pay them what they owe. And so this creates a climate of suspicion, of mistrust. And when you're invested in a game as a developer, you only have a partial vision of the project. And so, yes, I believe that having a global vision of every step of the project is essential. And this global vision should be brought by the publisher, but they're not always capable of doing that. Some of them see this as a sort of financial bet on a game and not a true partnership on a game that they believe in, that they can sell well. And this partnership should then result in happy developers and happy publishers. But often what developers identify as an essential point is marketing. They see it as a link with the consumer, and there they see that the publisher could be helpful on that step. But we forget that publisher publishes. There's a responsibility there. And for instance, the publisher is supposed to help the developer with the last steps. The beginning of the creation of the game works generally very well at the developer level, but for what we'd call post-production, if we were in the movie sector, that step often suffers when developers are left on their own. And their publishers should play a stronger role. And they should clarify that they're not just there to sign a check and maybe do a bit of marketing, but that they're really supposed to work alongside the developers, help them in creation, offer guidance without taking away any of their creative energy or identity. And often developers are afraid that they're going to lose control, creative control of the projects. This cannot be the case. It should never be the case. Some publishers do it, and the result is generally very poor. To each their own. There's a balance to find, but when we find that balance, then it's wonderful. That's why these partnerships should be supported, should be improved, and this allows everyone to create better games, to sell them better. Because if you have a brilliant idea and the game is not finished properly, or if it's not sold and nobody talks about it, well, then there was no point in having that brilliant game in the first place. So this is absolutely crucial. I am afraid there are no schools that really teach the production step, but
it's time to wrap up this roundtable. Thank you all for your participation. I will just recall that collaboration is important. We had some great examples of collaboration here, and also finding examples in neighbor countries or in success stories happening even overseas up to Quebec, as we saw at the beginning of the afternoon. Of course, the European Union, Creative Europe, all the tools that are implemented at the European level. Anton had questions about the new program. We had Martin here before discussing it a little bit, but it will all be more obvious when they will publish the guidelines in December and the roadmap of the new Creative Europe program in December. But I guess that all of you here also are in discussion with the EU. So I also think that the collaboration should not be just international, but also pan-European, and the organism that is representing Europe is still the European Commission. So it's also important to tell them what are the needs, and not only the national needs, but the needs in terms of collaboration. It seems more and more obvious that this is really a card they have to play on facilitating those collaboration, maybe in terms of incubation, maybe in terms of training for producers. Martin before was mentioning training programs. This is something that is new for video game. Anton, you were asking about what is happening in the future. Right now it's development. There's a development program that is very competitive because everybody has access to it, and we know it's very competitive. But what Martin was saying before is that as of January, the schemes will include training. So I think that is a very, very interesting thing as well. And I'm sure you are all very busy, but if with your companies, with your institutions, and with your experience, you can take part in those trainings, we will not be just limited to this Zoom call, and we will have this experience shared between partners at a bigger scale. Thank you very much. We will have a 10-minute breaks now, and then we will move forward with our third panel, the last panel of the day, focusing on distribution of indie games. Thank you all, and keep playing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to LabEurope. We are ready for the third and last panel of this afternoon. So after gender equality and game financing, we wanted to address the elephant in the room. I mean, I think in both panels, there were discussions about publishing, about releasing games, about the last part of the value chain, which is the connection between content and the audience. And when I say audience, I say users, I say players, of course, I mean players. So to discuss this topic today, we have, again, international guests. So we will start with Émilie Ruiz. Émilie is a professor at Beta University in Strasbourg, France. So welcome, Émilie. We also have Michael Pack. Michael is executive producer at THQ Nordic. The company is based in Austria. We have Kai Meseberg, head of mission innovation at Arte. Welcome, Kai. And Jérôme Wurster, co-founder and CEO of GWA Studios in France. You are all present. Thank you. So I'll go with the same organization as the previous panels. You just wave at me when you want to jump into one of the discussions, but we will start with one question addressed to each one of you. I want to remind the viewers that you are also able to ask questions in the chat. Those questions will end up on my screen, and I will try to include them in the discussion as well. So, Émilie, let's start with you. So, when we talk about publishing and when we talk about releasing games, it's about the relationship with players, and there are several models. Some have been more successful than others. And since you are a research lab, you work for a research lab, you have been studying those models, and you are perfectly able to tell us what is working, what is not working, and where should people start, depending on the kind of games that you have. So what is your experience and feedback about that?
Alors, effectivement, déjà, ce qui est important de savoir, c'est que la recherche en sciences de gestion est un tout petit peu en retard sur l'aspect jeux vidéo. Il y a beaucoup de choses à dire. Par contre, on a de la chance d'avoir quand même des études. Alors, tout à l'heure, vous avez parlé du marketing. Il y a aussi l'importance de la stratégie. Comme vous venez de le dire, on est sur la chaîne de valeur, la partie aval, la distribution. On va beaucoup essayer de connecter avec les utilisateurs et notamment les joueurs. Et ici, on a eu la chance en gestion d'avoir deux cas assez étudiés avec deux modèles très différents et deux stratégies très différentes. Donc, je vais en parler un petit peu, puis je pense que les autres participants auront peut-être des choses à dire sur leur propre expérience au regard de ces modèles. Le premier exemple marquant, c'est quand même celui d'Ankama, qui est un studio indépendant qui a été créé il y a à peu près 15 ans. On est parti sur le petit studio de 10 personnes. Aujourd'hui, c'est plus de 450 personnes. On est parti quand même, il faut le savoir, hein, sur trois copains qui voulaient monter une appli mobile pour les professionnels. Et on se retrouve aujourd'hui avec Dofus, qui est donc leur jeu qui rassemble plus de 25 millions de joueurs dans le monde. Donc, qu'est-ce qui fait qu'en Kama on est là? On est vraiment sur un modèle très spécifique qui a très bien marché. C'est une stratégie transmédia. C'est-à-dire que Dofus, aujourd'hui, en Kama, c'est un jeu, c'est Dofus. Alors, pas que, le monde a été étendu, mais c'est principalement ce qu'on va appeler un business model multiphase. C'est-à-dire qu'on est sur une stratégie qui part du jeu vidéo, mais qui va aussi sur de l'audiovisuel, du multimédia, du produit dérivé, de l'événementiel, de la musique. Et c'est tout cet ensemble d'activités autour du jeu Dofus et de l'univers en Kama qui fait que l'entreprise a pu se spécialiser. On est vraiment sur des joueurs qui sont connectés sur ces différentes activités et c'est vraiment en se spécialisant autour du jeu et en éparpillant pas son univers que l'entreprise a pu faire ça. Ce qui est intéressant de savoir simplement, à titre informatif, c'est que chez Ankama, 70 à 80% du chiffre d'affaires repose quand même sur la partie jeux vidéo. Donc on voit qu'il y a quand même dans le business model, on a une partie très stratégique qui est au cœur de l'activité. Ça reste le jeu vidéo avant tout. Par contre, vraiment en se concentrant sur son univers et en développant ses activités périphériques autour, l'entreprise a vraiment réussi à créer une communauté et à fidéliser une base de joueurs fidèles. Donc ça, voilà, c'est un premier modèle qui est très connu, très reconnu, qui a bien marché pour ce cas-là, dont on pourra reparler un petit peu après. Et puis le deuxième modèle qui est super intéressant aussi, c'est celui de LabEurope. Donc LabEurope, c'est pareil, à la base, c'est un studio indépendant, ça a été racheté par Ubisoft en 2009, pardon. C'était une dizaine de personnes à la base et ils ont très rapidement sorti un jeu vidéo qui est aujourd'hui phare, qui est Trackmania, donc un jeu de course en ligne. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que dès le départ, la stratégie, on revient sur ce terme de stratégie, a été une stratégie communautaire. C'est-à-dire que l'objectif de sortir ce jeu Trackmania pour LabEurope était double. C'était à la fois un jeu pour faire de la rationalisation, c'est-à-dire qu'il fallait faire un jeu à moindre coût, puisque c'était un premier jeu. Je pense que le panel précédent a bien, enfin, ça fait bien le lien avec ce qui a été dit. Mais il fallait aussi développer l'aspect créatif en permettant justement en fait, aux joueurs d'être totalement impliqués. Et en permettant en fait aux joueurs de créer du contenu pour le jeu, c'est-à-dire de créer des circuits, de s'impliquer totalement, de faire de la compétition, de donner leur avis, de leur mettre à disposition des outils aussi, de développement pour faire ces circuits et pour s'impliquer dedans, eh bien l'entreprise a réussi à fédérer une communauté et à leur laisser vraiment une très grande autonomie et une très grande liberté. Et aujourd'hui, Trackmania, c'est vraiment ce modèle communautaire qui fait que le jeu poursuit sans avoir une distribution non plus très médiatique forcément, mais qui fait que la distribution est très très forte aujourd'hui et se poursuit.
Because of the limited resources that we're using. So these are the two models that I would like to highlight. Thank you very much.
You work at THQ Nordic, and THQ Nordic has two different sides. So one is the content creation, so producing, and you're executive producer yourself, and the other one is publishing. And we know that today those publishing markets are quite global. I mean, platforms like Steam, like Epic Store, those marketplaces are accessible everywhere. The releases are global, happening day and date everywhere in the world. But still, in terms of strategy, THQ has different departments for the different territories. Can you tell us a little bit how it is organized like that? And maybe also, if you have something to say about Emily just said about the community approach. As a publisher, you gather audiences from different IPs. Do you have a technique or a strategy to also make them shift from one game to the other? Is it like utopia to think about that, or is it really happening?
First of all, we're primarily working on PC and consoles, and so the physical business is still a very valid business for us. So this also determines the whole strategy and also the structure of our just publishing business. So it's still the last numbers of Embracer is now it's 70-30. So 70 is digital and 30 is physical. And most likely with the current COVID situation, these numbers are from the first half year or from the last half year. Most likely they've shifted now towards digital distribution or more towards digital distribution. But still, it's still a very valid business for us. And even we split it up between digital business and local business or physical business. And with the physical business, of course, you need a much bigger, you need your foot in the door in a lot more territories. So the physical and the sales structure is mainly, it comes from the physical business. And then we also have the people who just work for the digital business. But it's also, you know, even with digital stores, there's a limited space, or the whole how do players discover the games? This is also a question. And so, of course, we also then work with, even if it's just digital, we work with local people or with the stores to actually get the best places in stores to have specials. So this is also something that we're working on a lot. And of course, there's also then a cultural factor to this as well. So this is also then why we have somebody in Japan, because the Japanese market is very, very different from the Western market. And so it's just very good to have somebody on the ground who can actually tell us, okay, this is going to work in this market, this won't work in this market. And also to have somebody, you know, even if you're working with Sony Japan, if you have somebody who can just call them and talk to them or present the games to them in their own language, within their own culture. This changes a lot in how you can, in the end, then really place the title there. So for these territories, it makes total sense to just have somebody on the ground. For Europe, for example, this is mostly a logistics question of logistics then in the end, because the markets are very similar, and also the digital markets are very strong. So that's how we basically structure the whole thing. So it is still a little bit traditional with the sales teams in the local markets, but since they also then take over a lot of marketing things in the markets, this is also something where it makes sense to have somebody on the ground. Yeah.
But is marketing one of the reasons, for example, for a publisher like THQ to build an identity? I mean, I guess when you are deploying marketing effort for one title that is in a specific genre or addressing a specific type of audience, then you can reuse most of that stuff to address the same kind of people for the next game. How are you guys handling that? I mean, how are you building this identity? How does it work? I mean, do you have like editors that are discussing that? Or it's also important for the studios when they come to you to know what you guys are interested in.
Sure. I mean, for us, there's a lot of factors that come into this. So of course, this is a product strategy of which products do we want. There is which territories are we strong in. You know, there's a lot of factors that come together, and shifting buyers or customers from one product to the other isn't really that easy. But of course, over time, you build, you know, relationships with certain magazines, with certain influencers, with a certain ecosystem within genres and territories. And of course, with that of course helps bringing players from one game to the other. So as soon as they hear, oh, okay, I like that game, or I usually watch that influencer, and that influencer usually reviews or plays these kind of games, and then that guy plays another one of our games, the trust is built over time. And that, of course, then helps people to decide, okay, I like that game, I like the genre, I like the influencer, that influencer played my game or our game for the third time now, okay, maybe I'll have a look at it. And so, of course, that reputation builds over time. But it's not as easy as with, you know, on mobile. It's much easier to just funnel people off. Okay, now go into this direction, you just bombard them with ads or anything if you now go over, you will get 5 credits here. We mainly do, or I think exclusively do pay-to-play things. So we don't have ads in our games for other games. So it can only happen outside of the game. And so that ecosystem of reviewers, influencers, magazines, that is more important for us than really just funneling players from A to B.
So brand identity was mentioned, and Kai, Arte has quite a strong brand identity that was built over time. It was not obvious at the beginning for Arte to operate this digital shift from the old, it's not old, but it's still present, but the audiovisual company became more like a transmedia company at first, like cross-media. There were a lot of experimentation with interactive documentaries and apps. And then finally, gaming came into play along with VR and augmented reality, for example. Since this is really a field at Arte, would you say that Arte has managed to build like some kind of community audience that they can activate for every release, or with every product that you guys are launching, you are attracting a new type of audience?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here in Strasbourg, virtually and in presence. It's, I think for the audience, I think there are some people who have Arte on their radar, and they look on what Arte is doing, and if there's a new production coming along the way, like Odessa right now, I can imagine that there are people who really have a sense for Arte experiences being published. Nevertheless, I think we are really looking also into innovation, so trying out different kind of things and not somehow having a business plan for games. That's less what Arte is doing. That's not so much the approach. I think it's really important to look first of all, which is mainly my job, to look into what is happening in the market, how it is changing, how it is shifting. Is game streaming the new thing? How are games used for other things, like AOC on Twitch and stuff like that? But also to see what kind of difference is there between a gamer or someone who is into a medium and the production of content. So what are new interesting approaches in experiencing stories, maybe games or gamified? That's a bit to discuss, but it's so back to your question. I think yes, there are people who really have us on the radar, but in general, it is that with every project, we are also putting our toes into maybe different kind of audiences and possible audiences, and to try out how things are getting traction or not. And that's, I think, the exciting things about the games that are published by Arte or co-produced by Arte together, obviously, with some great and talented studios.
Thank you, Kai. Jérôme, Kai was mentioning the originality of this sector, because we keep seeing new models, we keep seeing new initiatives, using technology in a new way. I was positively surprised when I checked your pitch deck at GWA with one of your games, your first game, that you guys are using technology such as blockchain or marketplaces with unique collectibles items that people can trade. So you are not into a narrative game so far, but you are into a new territory to explore with gaming. But you were also telling me that you are not so much interested in publishing right now because you want to keep the control of the marketing and the access to market and audiences. Can you tell us a little bit why?
Oui, merci Domenico. Non, bien sûr. Alors oui, c'est vrai.
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Of course, we want to keep as much control as we can on publishing. Just to give you a bit of context, by integrating, our goal is, of course, to entertain, but we also want to reward our gamers. So perhaps offering the possibility to our gamers that, well, to actually have some sort of a revenue. That's sort of a way that we conceive of a contribution to society, really. So I think that as a consequence, and this is something that we are seeing more and more, is that we do manage to hang on to our gamers, to our public. So that's why we want to really keep as much control as we can on the development and edition. So at first, we might have a harder time getting more and more people involved, but we managed to keep a larger percentage of those people that eventually do come over to us hooked on our products. Now, as so when we continue to flesh out these games and continue to develop functionalities in our games, ultimately our idea really is to concentrate on the game itself, but also on the possibilities for expansion beyond the game themselves. And for the time being, we know that bigger studios are a larger part of this last aspect, but of course, it's these editors themselves, these publishers themselves, that take care of most of the financial aspects of the endeavor. So, Emily,
like it's an interesting field for research because they are trying something new, if not new, something that is not generic and that is not the general model that we have so far. Can you tell us, like, to what extent the research that you guys are conducting are available to professionals and as an inspiration model or as resources for other studios to copy or to inspire themselves from success models?
Alors, moi, par exemple, je ne sais pas si je vais pleinement répondre à la question, mais en tout cas, en écoutant ce qui vient d'être dit, par exemple, par Jérôme, justement, sur l'aspect monétarisation, ça, c'est des choses sur lesquelles on a pour l'instant des premiers retours et que j'aimerais beaucoup investiguer, d'ailleurs, puisque pour l'instant, ce qu'on voit de la recherche et ce qui en sort, c'est que l'aspect monétarisation dans les communautés, il n'est pas toujours très évident. C'est-à-dire que ce qui fonctionne bien dans les communautés de jeux, là, j'ai parlé de Nadeo, j'ai parlé de
within a gaming community, I talked about Trackmania and other examples. So many, I can't even mention them all. I think that if we get back to just basic needs and basic motivations, that will manage to let us hang on to our public. But monetization is sort of like, it really is uncharted waters. We don't have, we're starting to get some feedback, but we don't have a lot of it yet. People, like we were saying, we were talking about a brand. We were talking about brand identity, belonging, being a part of a community. And when we become active within a community, games like, yeah, maybe it's because an influencer plays this game. And so this is what I was talking about when I was saying in intrinsic motivation. The aspect of motivation, of financial motivation, is something that we really haven't researched yet. Not that much.
It was also mentioned that I think who said that? I think it was Emily who was talking about Ankama and about their transmedia approach and the fact that today also, because the tools are the same, I mean, animation, traditional animation now is using Unreal Engine and Unity to build their material. when you are sitting in a chair of a publisher that is also a producer of content, and when you can also have full rights on your IPs and be able to do whatever you want with them, is it something that is being discussed at THQ, like maybe creating TV series out of your IPs, and because those would also be consumed on a PC or on a PlayStation, for example, because you have access to, I don't know, Netflix and stuff like that. So do you have this kind of 360 ambition, or do you feel that the video game market has to be strictly contained right now in the gamers sector?
I think there's a lot of potential there. I mean, we're already seeing a lot of TV series now even if The Witcher was based on the book and not on the game, but still it's most of the people know The Witcher as a computer game series. So it's already happening, and I mean, THQ Nordic has one of the biggest IP collections currently in the market. So because there's more than 100 IPs are currently in our catalog, and some of them are really, they would be a good fit for that. At the moment, we're focusing, of course, on games, but I think this is something that, of course, is a sensible approach. But I think we would do that with partners. But we think of it more as we are the keepers of the IPs, and so we want our IPs to thrive. And so branching out would make sense, but that's something that we would do with partners, basically.
So THQ is also buying out studios. You were saying that you, for example, for this IP thing, you would think about working with professionals that are already established. And this is the same logic when THQ is approaching a studio to just integrate the company. What is, in your opinion, the progression in Europe, and I'm specifically talking about Europe now, when we see some publishers, Joanne in the previous panel was mentioning one that is acquiring studios as well, and are becoming quite big. Do you feel like you guys can tackle the same market grounds than these giants that are out there and that are having like astounding marketing power? It feels sometimes when a new blockbuster game, AAA game is released that you don't see anything else for, I don't know, like a couple of weeks, and it can be a bit overwhelming and also a bit annoying for players. Do you think like it's an ambition to reach that goal, or you still feel that it's more about diversity and gathering creative power and creative energies from different places to still be able to offer this catalog, as you just said, of more than 100 IPs?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we also operate in a very different budget bracket than the really huge AAA productions do. So and this allows us to have a lot more diversity in our portfolio as well, and that's why we also then just can work with smaller studios from around the world and also release more niche titles. But of course, I mean, do you want to be in the same market as them? It always depends on how close you look. You know, if you just say action games, then of course you will be in the same market. But the deeper you go, basically, then there's small niches. And the good thing is that the gaming market is already big enough for those niches to be really profitable. And that is actually where we see ourselves. I mean, we have a lot of IPs, we have a lot of older IPs, but we also do, if we really like the games, we do new IPs, and we can try out a lot. I mean, we have over 40 titles currently in production. So we can try out a lot. We can try new markets. We can do a lot there and find niches that are just profitable enough to actually work for us. And also, the good thing is then if we, in our budget bracket, we can also leave a lot more creative freedom to the developer. If you do a 50 million title, you want basically everybody to like it. you can't really, you can't afford actually for somebody to say, well, no, that's a little bit too special for me, because you want everybody to like it. You've just invested 50 million into the production, so you want, of course, the money back. And by just being AA, as we call it, we can also give the developers a lot more freedom. We can try out a lot more things. We can work on genres that nobody else touches, because, well, you don't know. Maybe one of those new genres or new types just suddenly explodes, and we have a huge hit on our hands.
Et puis, comme ça, on peut avoir de belles surprises, porteurs de succès. C'est comme ça que c'est ça un peu notre approche. Ça nous intéresse pas de produire le nouvel Assassin's Creed. Disons des jeux plus modestes, plus petits, mais avec beaucoup plus de liberté, de créativité. Oui, ben
and it's really refreshing to be able to, as a narrative designer, I don't know from my colleagues, but I think they feel the same. It's very refreshing to be able to try out different things and to get also immediate feedback. There's this trial and error mechanism that is at play, but limiting the risk, and it makes great collaboration. So Jérôme, you wanted to say something about what Michael has just said.
Yeah, definitely. I have a question directed to Michael. You mentioned 100 plus IPs for THQ. By the way, I've had the chance to play a couple of games from THQ too. So good work, guys. Keep the good work coming. And for me, I see those 100 plus IPs really as value pockets everywhere. So some bigger than other ones. And Emily was mentioning the lack of research on monetization. And I was just wondering, don't know if you can tell much about that, but if you have new ways, or if you are thinking about new ways of connecting those pockets of value. So what I mean by that is use one IP and redirect it to another community that might be completely different from it. And if so, if you can tell us a bit more about that, because with, among other things, the blockchain technology, we have many ideas about how to connect that and to create even bigger communities. And therefore, I'm really interested into this subject.
In that regard, as I said in the first statement, it's for us, it's more if we're known as the company that does X, like one part of our portfolio is to use those old IPs and remaster them, or remake old games. Once you're known as the company that does that well, people, as soon as a new remake is announced, then people will come automatically, because they already know if people are interested in that, then they're gonna come. I don't think that we really actively shift people there. We just want to establish ourselves in the market as a certain brand, and then people will follow. This includes, of course, a lot of PR as well, because you need to earn that status, and you need a lot of good products for that as well, and a couple of similar products. I can also see from our Twitter feed and everything. So some people who are very active in some game announcements are also then very active in similar game announcements, but don't say anything for something that is completely off. So I think if the overlap is big enough, then those people are interested, and you already have that added value there. If it's too far away, then it also doesn't work. Plus, you need a certain frequency as well. So if you only release something every 2 years, then that thing will go up and go down, and people will forget about it. So as long as there's enough products in the same area, in the same niche, in the same thing, then I think you can get you pick up people that are, all these games have some overlaps, but also have some things that just only they have, and so you bring them in and those are the new ones that come. And with them, you just create a bigger thing of people who are interested in that area of business, basically. So that's what we do. We have sister companies like Coffee Stain, who are very active in more community approaches, and this is usually what we do mainly. What I call inside-out games. So we create, you consume. So there's not a lot of feedback. Of course, there's some user tests and everything, but it's more like a movie approach. You make a movie, you put it out, and people watch the movie as it was intended by the director. Other games, the more the outside-in approach would be much more with, you very much like on mobile or with early access, you build a base, you put it out, and then you basically, you can even start with, I don't know, you can announce your game on Reddit. And people will come, the community will thrive, and then it's a much more community-centered approach. And that works for them really, really well as well. So I think it's very hard to say, or it's very hard to have one strategy for all of these very, very different products. Sure. And that's why I said we do mainly inside out things, and that's also why we work with rather traditional things like PR, Twitter, social media stuff, and through that just generate our communities.
Okay, that definitely. Oh, Domenico, if I may just bounce back 30 seconds on it, that definitely works. So totally understand. But I think one thing that you mentioned, and that is really interesting, you mentioned, for example, that you need a frequency of content, and maybe a similar game 2 years later, it's too late, and a player may have forgotten about that, and that's where I think we can have like imagine new ways and new mechanics, because that's true. If even if like the content is the same, if the player is even maybe no more a player, that's too late. But maybe if he had items on the first game A, maybe he can redeem some value from those items in a game B. Even 2 years later, that would be a new incentive to make it another player. That doesn't guarantee 100%, of course, that they will come back in game B. But that's new ways of thinking that we are exploring as well.
I think it's also very different if you're just one sentence. If you're having, of course, something like a game as a service, and people are still playing it, then it's working a lot better. Also with the items. If for a single player game you give the player 2 years later an item that he hasn't played for 2 years, it doesn't really work. And I've seen several companies trying such strategies for traditional games. So, create where you have, get item A and they, at least when they tried it, that was like 2015 to 2017, it didn't really work. So I think if you have a service, if it's really a value to the player, still a value to the player, then they're gonna react. If it's not, it's nice, but only for a very small fraction of your customers.
But something very interesting in the fact of having a catalog of IPs and of being mostly an inside out, as you mentioned it, publisher and producer of content, is that now, because we have a video game culture, because the video game has been around for, I would say, 50 years now, we do have nostalgia in video game, and this means that remakes and being able to take an IP that was very popular back in the days and putting it back in the front row again is attracting a whole community as well. That is not a niche, that is really, it's like it's happening in cinema. Video game has been doing that now for quite a while now. It has been very successful, and you are doing it as well. Emily, you wanted to intervene on what was just said, and after that I will have a question for Kai.
Ouais, et justement, je me permets par rapport à ce qui vient d'être dit par Michael, il y a quelque chose de très intéressant, et j'aurais aussi une remarque en cas de question, mais c'est pas trop pour Kai. Il vient d'être dit justement qu'il existe énormément de modèles qui, voilà, on ne fait pas à chaque fois de la même façon, parce qu'il y a plein de raisons qui expliquent qu'il n'y a pas une façon de faire, et ça c'est tout à fait vrai. Il y a un point peut-être, moi, qui m'interpelle de ce qui est présenté des différents intervenants, c'est que dans le cas d'Arte, On est sur une entreprise qui n'est pas issue seulement du jeu vidéo, qui n'est pas vraiment spécialisée là-dedans à la base. Ce qui veut dire que là, on est sur une stratégie transmédia, certes, mais du coup, on n'est pas sur un seul et même business model. On va être sur un portefeuille de business model. Et ce que la recherche, elle nous apporte aujourd'hui là-dessus, c'est que pour que ça fonctionne, il faut créer des synergies entre les business models. Du coup, voilà, je ne sais pas si Arte, en tout cas dans sa stratégie, a pensé un petit peu à ces différentes synergies qui peuvent être créées, parce qu'Arte, ça touche un public très vaste, très large, assez différent. Et avec ce portefeuille de business model, est-ce que justement il y a des choses pour créer des synergies, des passerelles entre ça en termes de recherche, il n'y a rien qui est fait sur le jeu vidéo. Par contre, c'est des sujets qui sont très, très intéressants. Comment est-ce que je peux proposer de la valeur en cohérence avec justement la valeur de l'entité qui me la propose pour créer ces synergies?
There's an interesting question. How can I create value that's coherent there? Well, first of all, Arte is a public channel, so our business model is to spend money.
En Allemagne, donc nous, comme Arte, on n'a pas forcément.
At Arte, we don't have a traditional business model, of course, not the same kind of business model that you would find in the private sector. That's a very important difference to take into account. The second difference is the support we offer to young creatives. The support we offer to new productions. These show us what different other media could be interesting for a public channel and how we can adapt these media. We can wonder whether there's a possibility to create things in parallel, to create approaches to different generations, give ways to parents to better understand their kids and the other way around. So this is an important thing for Arte to explore. We're trying to touch different audiences and create a form of intergenerational training on new technologies. We are also trying to altogether think about what could be Arte in 2030 or in 2050. What kind of interactions could be layered on what we are already doing? These things, for instance, that are being added in the realm of virtual reality could be interesting to explore. In 2013, with Fort McMoney, we explored that a little. It was a documentary game. Can consider that as the older uncle of Bandersnatch on Netflix. So this was a way to explore how to tell stories differently. So if we want to talk about business models here, I think this would be our business model, to try and figure out what our future looks like and how we can offer support to young producers who are just getting started and who are offering very innovative content. There, I believe there are no real markets. When we started with virtual reality, for instance, 7 years ago now, there were no virtual reality headsets on the market. Well, some prototypes, but this wasn't a $6 billion global market back then. So this is what's interesting to us, I believe. When we started around 2006 or 2007 maybe to explore streaming, so that was just a bit before Netflix, there was not yet a streaming industry in the background like we would have it today. So I believe that this is a role, an important role that must be played by the public sector. This allows a form of communication that includes all generations to show this is progress, and there we can all find common points.
It's also spending money. And
time.
And time, but time is money anyway. So even when you have a public channel or public network offering content for free, the investment on the player side is enormous. We know that the content today is king. There's content everywhere. If you have a Netflix subscription, but it's the same with other companies, Amazon, Hulu, whatever, every day you have an enormous amount of content being released, like TV series that use your time, will catch your attention for 20, 25 hours in binge watching. So this is also quite a great competition for games, because now the players, they will be using the same devices, namely their computer, a TV, a console, to access that as well. And it doesn't seem at this stage that there's a lot of cross collaborations between those two markets. I mean, Netflix has been experimenting a little bit with games. I remember they came to the Gamescom once with Stranger Things as a video game, and people were queuing like crazy when, you know, they just had one game. So you really feel that audience feedback is important. Michael was mentioning it. Feedback is everything he said, actually, everything you said, Michael, was about the feedback you got from the games that you already sold, and were they working or not. So even if you're in an inside-out company, you still have a feedback loop that is there. I mean, people are buying, so this is already a feedback. It sells or not, but there's gold in feedback today. So we are talking about data. We are talking about everything that the devices that we're using to play are allowing to gather. Can you guys tell me, like, also Jérôme, at your level as a producer of content, are you implementing strategies to collect data? Emily, I guess this is also something that you guys are studying. I mean, because without feedback, without data, you cannot research. And Kai, at Arte, are you using that kind of feedback to understand what you have, where do you have to go next? Because as you said, as a public body, it is also, there's one part of fan service, like doing what people are expecting, but there's also this discovery aspect, this that is there as well. But this is not random. It's something that you anticipate. There's something that comes also out of data. So can I ask each one of you to give me an opinion about how today you handle data at the distribution level? Maybe Jérôme, you can start.
Yeah, sure. Totally agree with you. From day one, data is maybe the new gold for video game as well. So we need it on both sides, for the technology and the service, but also for the games, and we need it both on the game and outside the game, as I already said. So we defined really what we want to track in the game. So we have several data layers in the game that fires data when we want it. Then we try to put as much parameters as we can, so we have some context around the data. That's also super important. And for development, and to choose which game we are going to produce, which kind of environment, which genre and type of the game, we also do some maybe not so typical research, but we go on the store, we do some scrapping of all the feedback and everything that we want to implement or not. If we see a similar feature in a game, we can do that, gather the feedback, and the game may be great, but maybe one feature is mentioned all around the comments, and maybe we should consider improving this feature or not implementing it. So it's really in the game and outside the game, and both are super important. And the feedback loop, as you mentioned, is always there.
Michael, is it something that you share with the content creators? On a personal note, coming also from the traditional audiovisual industry, for example, we sold a film to Netflix and we didn't know anything about how the film performed afterwards. As a writer, I didn't get any feedback. So if I had to write another film for them, I wouldn't know what I would have to change. I mean, there's zero feedback loop. So how are you guys working with the data, with what you guys are collecting, and is this information shared with your partners?
I mean, there's also, like Jerome said, there's two parts. One is the one from the development side. So in the game, this is of course also important. How far, when did people start to play? What did they play? So that's one area. And the sales data, the pure sales data, yes, of course, we share that with our partners, because we also share the revenue. So we have a very fair model of revenue share, and that also includes that the partner sees how many units have been sold in which territory, where it did really well, where it didn't do really well, what marketing has been, or what has been spent on marketing. So this is a very transparent process, as we really work with people, with the content creators, with the ones who really bring in their creative ideas. And so yeah, that data is of course shared. For whether it worked or not, when you said with a movie, I think that is really more down to direct feedback. Sometimes it's really hard to just measure how much fun people had, or what really worked and what didn't work, so that it's not so easily quantifiable. So it's rather than collecting feedback, analyzing it, and then giving it back, instead of just pure numbers, or just having big data included everywhere, like it is in browser games or in mobile games. It's a whole data minefield basically out there. This is not something we do. We still understand that games are a little bit more like, it's not art, but more work of craft, instead of just a whole data mining thing, and we just optimize everything. It's also that comes from the nature of our games, them being inside out and not games as a service. So usually we put it out, then we see whether people like it or not. And if they really like it a lot, then we maybe create 2 more DLCs, and then we already working on a successor, instead of putting something out and improving on the one thing until it's working. So it's a different approach depending on the game, and we're more in the former. So putting it out, one piece of work, and if people like it, we add something to it. But we don't optimize it in a way that mobile games or websites or anything in that direction are improved.
And Kai, to what extent Arte is taking into consideration this feedback loop to influence their editorial line, or what is coming next?
Well, for games in particular, it's my dear colleagues in Paris who look together with the production studios and the people involved in the production at the end of it, and when the game was launched and all that, into details, and have a look on what went well and how did it went and why did it went well and stuff like that. So we on data points and comments in the stores and all these kind of things. So that's for sure. And maybe somehow we learned a bit from that more data-driven approach also for, let's say, analyzing stuff in our core business of TV, of broadcasting, to look maybe a bit differently on the on comments. Recently I just adapted a season of a program I'm working on based on some impressions I had, but also on YouTube comments, and those were good ones. So I think it's really on many different drivers. We can pick up and learn a lot to be ready for the future media, and that's, I think, really important to underline from my point of view.
Thank you. And Emily, I guess this data for you is key with your research, and it's not always easy to access. I mean, some companies are really operating as black boxes, and for a researcher, it's not always easy to get like first the information and then interpret the information is another thing. So do you think that this data is circulating enough, or are you still struggling with that?
Ça, c'est sûr que c'est un petit peu le nerf de la guerre, en tout cas pour nous, de trouver de la donnée, d'accéder à de la donnée et pas seulement à quelques informations, vraiment de pouvoir aller en profondeur dans les choses. C'est super important. Mais je pense qu'aujourd'hui, ce que j'observe, en tout cas, ça me fait penser à quelque chose d'intéressant pour ces entreprises du jeu vidéo et plus largement peut-être les entreprises du secteur des industries créatives comme la musique, c'est que justement, à part quand on est un big player et qu'on est bien installé sur le marché, on fait ses jeux, qu'on a déjà sa fanbase, qu'on a sa communauté, j'ai l'impression que les nouveaux entrants sur le marché ont besoin de plus que des feedbacks. Enfin, en tout cas, moi, c'est ce que je vois. J'ai étudié plusieurs studios qui ont été créés il y a quelques années. Et c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, en termes de recherche, nous, on va beaucoup parler d'innovation ouverte, c'est-à-dire comment j'innove avec des partenaires externes. Et on va aussi beaucoup parler de crowdsourcing. Comment est-ce que j'innove aussi avec des utilisateurs, avec monsieur tout le monde. Et je pense qu'aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment ça aussi pour les nouveaux entrants sur le marché, ou en tout cas les entrants plus récents, qui n'ont pas forcément une position très forte, très dominante, pardon. C'est aussi de voir comment, au-delà d'avoir un feedback, comment est-ce que justement la donnée, le contenu, je peux le générer et le créer. Comment est-ce que je me crée en fait ce réservoir à idées, ce réservoir à contenu. Et donc c'est vraiment bien plus que du feedback, j'ai l'impression. Voilà, donc il y a plein de choses qui sont mises en place par les communautés, entre autres, mais pas que, pour justement avoir ce réservoir qui va nous permettre derrière, plus que d'avoir des retours, de vraiment générer du contenu. C'est hyper important.
I would like to connect everything we just said to the European level of things. Creative Europe is co-funding this initiative of LabEurope. We know that Europe has been increasingly developing their video game sensitivity, I would say, because they came a long way, and they're still not there completely, but considering your positions also as a public network, as a private publisher that is also a content provider, as a young studio, and as a laboratory and more academic research side of things, do you plan with the EU, or is it something that is in your space, or do you feel that right now they haven't been touching the kind of activity that you guys are involved with? And if they would have to go that direction, what do you think they should do on a European level to facilitate and maybe improve your work? Because we know that at the end of the day, circulation is everything. And if a game, it was said before, you can have the best game ever, just released at the wrong time, nobody's seeing it, and then it will be a flop. So having a push in terms of distribution, having different eyeballs internationally turned to your content might be very useful. And who else than the EU, with their umbrella scope, could organize such a thing? So do you have a message for the EU? I guess this is what my question is about. Yes, Kai.
Yeah, I would like to say something because I need to leave in a few seconds. I think we just need to look on the reality of what is digital today, and I don't, well, maybe you know, but I don't know any platform from Europe which is relevant in that kind of field. As much as I like a lot of Japanese productions and companies and what they're doing and how they are able to create fantasies and attract interest and become part of life of many people, and also people from the States, and the fantastic story of ID software, and you know, there are many things, but in Europe, you know, we are in what's this, 50 years of gaming or game industry, let's say, more or less, and there's nothing. So that's a starting point.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. Go.
Thank you, Kai.
Okay.
So, I think you are going to Pittsburgh right now, right?
Yes, to Hermitage Museum.
Virtually.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Who else has a comment on that? Is there something that could benefit from this industry coming from the European level? Yes, Emily.
Non, du coup, moi, ce qu'il me semble, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, on est, alors en termes de recherche, hein, en tout cas, on a des groupes de travail sur le jeu vidéo, on a des groupes transdisciplinaires, déjà, ça c'est important de le dire, c'est qu'on ne reste pas chacun focus sur sa discipline. Par contre, c'est vrai qu'au niveau européen, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres pays qui travaillent sur le jeu vidéo en termes de recherche, quelle que soit la discipline. Et surtout, je trouve qu'il manque encore Strasbourg, c'est très, très dynamique, hein, mais je trouve justement qu'il manque peut-être de passerelles entre le monde académique, pardon, et les entreprises. Donc moi encore, je suis en sciences de gestion, donc mon travail, c'est de regarder les organisations, les entreprises. C'est vrai qu'il manque peut-être de groupes. Le jeu vidéo, on sait qu'il manque quelque chose dessus, et je pense qu'on gagnerait à un niveau européen, en tout cas, de pouvoir regarder ce qui se fait, et de plus travailler entre académiques et entre entreprises. Donc, si les entreprises sont intéressées pour des études, n'hésitez pas.
The academic part of things. So if companies are interested, let us know.
Favor international distribution for games? You don't hear me?
Sorry?
Yes, I was asking.
Sorry, I'm always switching back and forth from the interpretation of
the channels. Yeah, no worries. What is your opinion about that? Do you feel that there's a gap or something that the EU could fill with their action in a pan-European way?
To be honest, I don't really see something that really big, or that could really make a huge difference. I think with funding relevant productions, I think that is something that already helps a lot with content coming from Europe. The ways that they're sold, they change so quickly. Also, I mean, there's so much money involved and so much power, and the way the Epic Store, for example, came to power cost a lot of money. But there's established players. You can't ignore the established players. So if there is something that can only be something additional, not really, you know, something for the European market. And I think what the EU can do is just fund creative ideas. I think that the current market with the distribution channel is already rather settled. So just bringing something into that would be very difficult for a European player. So I think by helping European productions getting recognized on a world stage, this is something that the EU can do. I think on the distribution level, that's rather hard. Or I don't see it. I mean, I'm sure there are ways, but I can't see them at the moment.
Definitely, thank you. And Jérôme, do you have something to add to this?
I totally agree with what Michael just said. Yeah, I've been part of the co-production. I can see Thierry here. I don't know if he's still there.
He's still there. I think he's
but that's definitely something, and some initiative like this one that can help, but that's more like private independent initiatives. I have the feeling that it's kind of easier to get subvention from a country for a country, and that maybe there is something to do with pan-European IP in the co-production market. We discuss a lot about the German fund, but obviously, and for some reasons, they want the fund to stay in Germany. So that's legal constraint around funding, distribution, and IP that may be preventing further co-production at the European level. So maybe there is a subject on this one. Or if they can just, force Apple and Google to diminish the the commission, then it's easier. But I think Apple have done that for very small studios, so that's a good start.
Yeah, there's work on the audiovisual level right now with the European directives, for also forcing the platforms to spend money on territories. Maybe this will be adopted in the future, but we're not there yet. So thank you guys for your participation. Thank you. It was a lot of knowledge. Thank you for sharing it with everyone here. Thank you, LabEurope, for inviting me. It was a great afternoon. I actually didn't see the time pass, but we are at the end now of this day. Aurélie, I will let you conclude. Are you okay with that? Thank you very much. Keep playing.
Merci.
Ciao.
Thank you, bye.
Aurélie,
Qu'est-ce qui se passe là?
Non, c'est juste pour te rappeler, n'oublie pas de.
Ouais, c'est dans mon truc.
Yes, Aurélie, it's your turn.
Merci, Domenico. Parfait.
So yes, thank you so much, Domenico. Thank you for your help here. We have written down everything you said, and it was really interesting and very productive series of meetings. Oh, there seems to be an issue.
C'est bon, Domenico?
Domenico, is everything fine? Yes, absolutely. We can hear you perfectly.
Ok.
Je suis désolée, je m'entends en deux, donc voilà. Donc je vais
Sorry, I'm hearing my own voice twice, so that was a little confusing. I'll start over. So we have been talking a lot about the importance of cooperation and research and distribution and production. We have talked about the importance of Creative Europe. We have talked about the importance of freedom, of creative freedom in studios. And yes, I will try to remember everything that was proposed. Now, I would like to thank our two moderators, Fanny and Domenico, as well as our interpreters, Jamil and Adine, and our technical team, Pierre Robin Lona, my colleague, Jonathan, Nanya, who's a new intern and who directly got started with this ambitious project. So we'll meet again tomorrow for the rest of this event of the Europa Games Week with our partner, Strasbourg Games community. For LabEurope, we'll do this again next year. Until then, see you tomorrow or talk to you soon if you have any questions on the Europe Creative Program. Thank you.
Merci.